I'd like to call this work session order. It's a work session on the 2018 budget overview, general government operating and capital. Lance Wilbur, I think you're going to be leading this discussion. But first, I'm going to Rose for 10 minutes on amendments. The process we've got for amendments, because she's got some timelines. I want everybody, if you want an amendment to get through, to follow her process for getting amendments into her. Rose?
This probably won't even take 10 minutes, but I know some folks are new to the budget process, and I just wanted to let you know what our timeline is moving forward. We have the amendment templates, which I'll email out to everyone after this meeting. I have printed copies I can hand out now. If you have ideas for amendments and you want some help with them, please let me know now. I'm happy to take your concept and turn it into a budget amendment. I need to know in the next couple weeks if you do want help with those. Okay. We are asking that amendments be turned in to me in the clerk's office by the end of the day, Monday, November 13th. Your work session on amendments is going to be that Friday, November 17th. That gives me some time to go through and clean them up. The chair and I will meet and we'll assemble the packet for your work session. Amendments that are presented at the work session give the administration time to consider them for an S version before the assembly acts on the budget and any remaining amendments that aren't included. So again, the deadline for that is Monday, November 13th, close of business, and that's the Monday before your Friday amendment work session. If you have any questions, let me know. In your packet, you have the templates for the operating budget and capital budget amendments. If you have a utility or enterprise amendment, just let me know and we can make that change. You're welcome to use the operating budget amendment for that, and I will make the conforming changes to the correction.
Just for those that have not gone through this process, please listen to what Rose is telling you. Get your amendments in early. Those usually get accepted by the body, but those that just have amendments that they want to do at the last minute of the Assembly meeting, the day we pass the budget, usually don't fare too well. So I get them in early.
By Monday, you're welcome to bring other amendments to the work session. We ask that you bring enough copies for all members in the public, which is 25, to make copies in the clerk's office, but we may be limited on the time we have to help with amendments that are not received by close of business Monday, November 13th.
Now we need to go around the room and identify ourselves for the record. Amy, we'll start with you, ma'am.
Amy Dubofsky.
Mike Abbott, Lance Wilbur,
Fred Dyson, Forrest Dunbar,
Pete Peterson,
Suzanne LaFrance.
Eric Croft,
Dick Trainey.
Christopher Constant, Felix Avera, John Muddleton, Jim Steele.
Okay. Lance, sir, we'll turn the time over to you.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate your time today with the Assembly. We're scheduled from 12:30 to 4:30 today. We'll take a 15-minute break somewhere around 2:15, if that's okay. And then our timing this year...
Lance, do you want to take questions as they come up or wait till the end?
You can do that, Mr. Chairman.
As they come up?
Yeah, the best way to do it. If I can't answer them, I'll get back. So the way we're going to organize today's presentation is we're focusing on the operating budget for the general government today. We're going to be working through all departments. We're going to begin with the municipal managers departments for the first hour and a half, and then we'll move on to Chris Schutte at Economic and Community Development, and we'll move on to CFO. Primarily, the information I'm going to share with you today is related to the ordinance 2017-124, which is the ordinance recommending approval of the general operating budget for 2018. I passed out 3 handouts. I will give you one more after the break. The first one is a copy of the slides that you're going to see up on the board here. The other one is an 11 by 17 map, colored map that we'll talk about when we get to the capital project, so that people will get a reference. And the third one is a handout sheet of paper that illustrates the Parks and Rec projects that are in Chuyank River. So I'm going to make sure we'll reference those this afternoon when we have John Rada and his department. So, again, we'll work through municipal managers departments, and this is the order in which we're going to work through them, from police all the way through the municipal attorney department. And then what we'll do with these presentations is we'll show the difference, any changes between the existing 2017 budget and the 2018 proposed. They have a capital program. We'll do their operating budget first, and then we'll review their capital program after that. So just a reminder, after a break, we'll start with Chris, and then we'll move to finance. In the event that you don't have enough time today, the departments that are at the end of our session are all in this building. We'll be able to pick those up next week if time is necessary. So, this slide should look very familiar. I want to start off with a summary of the 2018 proposed budget. The 2017 budget after our first quarter revisions is at $509 million. The proposed budget that we have is at $519 million. The position count is down. As you can see, there's a variation of public safety and, go ahead. We show the counts of public safety and non-public safety in this slide here. The property tax, if we apply the 2017 budget and we just look forward to the 2018, the amount of property tax increase is about $3 million. However, the administration in this budget has built in the assumption that the gas tax would be applied. If that gas tax was in effect, the amount of property taxes for the budget would be $276 million. There's a slide in this presentation where we'll show you where all of the revenue sources are coming from that will help you explain where those funds are coming from. Inside the budget book itself, there is a short section in there that's the overview, and it gives you a very high-level overview of the mayor's priorities and basically what we're spending our money on, where our money is coming from, and a very simple synopsis of position count and things like that. I've taken a couple of those graphics and I've illustrated them here. So basically what you see is on the property tax side, you see $295 million. The reason that number is larger is it includes all of the service areas, which is roughly $18 million or something like that. So that's everything, all of the property taxes, not just those that I showed you earlier. Let me highlight some of these changes, maybe for some of these categories, for some of the new assembly members, particularly in the other special assessments, fines, forfeitures, investment income. About 50% of that $15 million comes from resources from traffic, trial, and court fines, and then roughly about half of that comes from our investment portfolio. Under the contributions and transfers, that's the MOA trust and the utility dividend that we receive, which in this budget includes some of that. We'll talk a little bit about utilities. The state and federal revenues, that's the revenue sharing, and we get a little bit of money from the state of Alaska to operate their traffic signals. And there's a blend of other things. Those are some of the big ones. License and fees, that includes the ambulances and the transit fares. Those are some of the bigger ones, and there's a variety of other ones in there. Each one of these categories, there's a lot of detail. If you have any interest, or if you have a particular fund that you want to know and you can't find it, just call me and I will get it. The taxes and payment in lieu of taxes, primarily the room tax, marijuana, and things of that nature. And then the last one are those that are inside the cap: auto, tobacco, vehicle, ISA. It includes the gas tax. So if the gas tax, as you make your deliberations, if it were included, as it's included in this, it's part of that 16%. If it were not, then the property tax number would be bigger and the taxes and others would be smaller. So,
Fred has a question. Sir, Fred?
Yeah. Explain to me the intergovernment charges, please.
So intergovernmental charges, so when, for example, ML&P or any departments that use the services for purchasing, procurement, payroll,
I got it.
it's their overhead.
And the utility.
Go ahead, Eric.
Sorry, the utility, MISA, MISA, all those things are in the tax cap or out of the tax cap?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Go ahead, Lance.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is a simple illustration of how the budget is divided based on basically about 10 different categories. Our personnel portion of our budget is about 56%. Keep going that way on the clock. Supplies, primarily, it's fuel, lubricants, materials, metal, wood, aluminum, paint, everything that we require to operate those businesses. Travel doesn't even show up. Other services, that's literally our contracted services, leases, lease payments, there's everything from snow plowing to rental rates to contracts for Anchorage services, anything that we do in a professional service, vote by mail, whatever it might be, it's gonna be included in there. And then debt, depreciation, and then a small amount of capital outlay. Most of the capital outlay is primarily in maintenance and operations. Here's a graphic that illustrates how our budget is divided based on the percent of our budget and the amount of it by department, starting from the top to the bottom. They're not in alphabetical order. So police and fire, as you can see, they're about 39% of our budget. They're also about 39% of our position count. Take out the debt and depreciation, from maintenance and operations to community development, minus the convention center, that's roughly 35% of our budget. And then everything else over on the right-hand column, that's 10% of our entire budget, from library to the CFO.
John has a question. John?
Going back to page 6, the debt service, so is the payments to that police and fire fund in here?
It is not.
Where does that go?
So when I get to the department slide, I'll show you where we've removed that contribution as an expense from their particular budget, but that would be part of that.
Typically, our contribution to police and fire retirement is split between police and fire departments. And that is before we proposed the alternative financing regimen that you're considering next week, we would have had, I think, $5.2 million in each department budget.
Any other questions, John?
No, thank you.
The debt service on this slide is only general obligation debt.
Lance?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just as a reminder, we started this budget process with about $20 million of a challenge to solve. About 25% of that is through recommendations of proposed reductions in departments. About half of that is based on the recommendations that we just talked about in the previous work sessions for the certificate participation, and then the rest of it has to do with some revenue changes. We had a little bit of benefits of marijuana and some other options, but these are some of the significant changes that allowed us to get to a balanced budget. Positions. This is a graphic. This is a summary that's also available inside your budget book, but by department. And we will go through each one of these individually when we get to each department. And I can share with you now which of these are filled or vacant. We can do that as we go through each department. I would recommend that we do it that way.
We'll take your method.
Thank you. So basically, this is a summary of the difference between 2017 and 2018, and by department. For example, in the assembly department on the top row, in 2017, they had 26 full-time, 1 part-time. In 2018, as opposed to have 25 full-time, 1 part-time, 26. And we'll go through each of these departments, but this is a quick summary sheet for your reference. The other thing that we're going to talk about is the capital program. These are an illustration of where a department may benefit from a bond. This is not necessarily how the bonds will be created. For example, there will not be a library bond, but there will be work done in a library that's bonded, and it will probably be under area-wide. Parks and Rec and PM&E are similar, but by department, these are where the projects are going to likely end up, assuming those bonds pass. And again, as we get through each of these departments, we will talk about the projects in some detail as we walk through.
Yes, excuse me, Forrest, go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Lance, I don't know if you were about to say this, so I apologize if I'm interrupting you, but for the new members on the body, you can see right there, it says state 55 million. Every time we get one of these packets, you see a ton of projects, the critical maintenance projects, critical infrastructure projects we've asked the state to help us fund, and they don't. So that's another 55 million that very little of that, unless I'm mistaken, very little of that will actually come to us. Back in the day, It used to.
He used to, as did other things.
Thank you, Forrest. That's a good point. And then the other category, we'll talk about those as well. Primarily, it's IT, but that's when we get to the IT department this afternoon. We'll touch on that. So I'm going to start with the departments. The first one we're going to start with is police. But before I do that, for the new members, let me kind of explain how we build this budget. It's basically a six-step process. It's very simple, as I say. We take a budget that they had after 2007. When we approve their budget, we make some adjustments, and we will do that again every year. We make some adjustments in March. It's called the first quarter revision. We take that budget amount right there, and then the next thing that we do is if they had any one-time expenses, a one-time hit of money for a one-time thing, we take that off of that number, and we make any adjustments. Then, if they incurred or they have less debt, we make that adjustment to their 17 budget. Any changes to their labor, if they have changes in their labor contract for 1.5% or whatever it might be, or they had some positions lose, we put that in there. That gets us to a continuation budget for 2018. Then we will add any one-time things in 18, like an academy, and then we will add any programmatic things that the administration wants to do. So some departments won't have all of those steps, but basically that's how we build this budget. And so when you see these sheets, you'll see that type of information. So we'll start with police. Does that make sense to most everyone? So for the police department, their staffing is recommended to be the same, about 600 from 2017 to 2018. You can see that we had some one-time expenses in 2017 that related to recruiting. They did have some academies last year that the Assembly supported, so those were very successful. They had some one-time money that was appropriated to them for a litigation that does not continue. And then they had some changes in their fleet. Across the city last year, we reduced departments' fleet rates because we used the fleet fund to support the fleet for a one-time expense to support those fleet needs. We're not doing that. We're proposing that in 2007 and 2018. Any debt that they might have, and then changes in existing programs. So basically, that $5.8 million, that would be any adjustments they have in their labor, primarily in their contract. So those are increases to their personnel cost from 17 to 18. Any classifications, they might have some non-labor changes in their supplies that they've added or taken out. That's a summation on this line right here. Police and fire medical liability, there's a little bit less dollars for reduction for 2017. Now, if you look at 2018, those are the new things that are being proposed. There is a proposal to do an attrition academy. So there's funding for an attrition academy, and then we are adding to the APD fleet. So there's a need to increase the amount of fleet rental rates from APD. That'll be $300,000. And then cost of living for the executive employees. You will see this line pretty much in every department where the administration is proposing a pause on a 1.5% increase in executive salaries. I know that there will be some adjustments here. The mayor's intentions were those that be all in department heads and senior management. In some cases, departments, they may have executive employees that are down more like a non-rep. So I know that we'll be looking at those.
Well, let's go a few questions for you. Do you want to pause now or come back?
Can I just finish with one?
Go ahead, sir.
As Mr. Abbott was just illustrating, John was just asking, you can see here where you remove the cost of the contribution for 1 year in 2018 for fire for that certificate of participation. That's basically half of the $10 million, so that would not be there. And then Girdwood Valley Service Area, obviously, any changes in those numbers are adjusted and approved by the board.
John? And Forrest.
We're negotiating, are we in negotiations for their new contract?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, that is currently in, there's a tentatively approved contract with APDEA. It is currently before the union for ratification at this time. If ratified, it'll come to the Assembly at the November 7th meeting for introduction, for action on December 5th.
So does this assume the currently active contract or the one that will be?
This assumes the contract that we expect to be implemented in 2018.
Anything else, John?
No, thank you.
Forrester?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, kind of preliminary questions for you, Mr. Chairman, and for the administration. So I know last year we had a hearing like this where we had a representative from each department every time we went through a department, and they were able to answer very detailed questions about their budget, presented in this operating budget binder you gave us. Is that what we're doing right now, or is that going to be another future hearing?
This is the only presentation we have scheduled on the budget. We did not invite individual department heads. There's a couple that I know that I had heard from assembly members from the assembly office.
Which we did invite.
This afternoon, and they'll be here. Their plan was not to have the department heads here. If you have questions, we will take those back and get a response from you.
Okay, so that
Because
was
they've got, we didn't because they've got jobs they've got to do. There's some of the departments we did request some to come here,
Sure.
but not police.
Okay, good. So good. My specific questions then on police.
Okay.
Two questions going off of the and it's not up there, but the binder you gave us on the 4th page of the budget given to us. Two questions. One, there's about $1.5 million decrease in program generated revenue. We're still above where we were in 2016, and I know these things sort of fluctuate with the CFD and that kind of thing, but I'd like a detailed explanation if possible on why our program generated revenue is falling so much for the police. Second question, what's behind the large drop, again on the 4th page, the large drop in the price of contractual services to this department? And I think that some of these are SAP related. I know that there are certain things in here that are happening SAP related.
I will find out. The first question is probably going to be the question between police and treasury, and the second question I'll want to find out about particular contracts.
Okay.
Eric?
So, the budget process that you described makes sense sort of numerically in building a budget. Another approach is sort of a zero-based budgeting where you re-look at it again. I understand why the process you described would be, in some senses, easier to build. But is there ever any time where we sort of re-look at everything and say, why do you need a PR person or whatever, right?
And frankly, in these other times, and for the last 6 years, we do that every year. Why do you need this in a continuation budget? Most of the continuation budget is built on primarily labor or contractual requirements, economic programs.
Got it, cool, that answers that question. And then I guess I expected this to be the only one where we'd see an increase in full-time positions. Is it because they were already built into the 18 budget previously?
So for the police department, the goal was to get to 400 and.
Mr. Croft, so we're currently budgeted in 2017 for 440 sworn officers. For a variety of reasons, primarily attrition, both from the training program as well as attrition from the sworn officer workforce, we have not reached that objective. And so at this point, we don't need more budgeted positions in order to continue to grow the department. So in 2018, we expect the department size to be larger as a result of the growth in the department during 2017. So the trainees that we hired in 2017 will hit the streets in 2018. And in addition, we will have it may be 2 academies, but it will basically backfill for attrition in 2018.
Will we have real new police bodies that we didn't have before on the street in 2018?
Yes.
And it's just, so the
30 to 40 more than we had at the beginning of 2017.
And the reason the number stays 599 here is because we hadn't been able to fill those in 17 and they were theoretical in 17 and they're real in 18?
Yeah, and it's not so much filling them, it's the attrition that happens during the year. Because, like the fire department, we add employees through academies. This isn't like bus drivers or park employees where we hire, somebody retires, we hire for that position. We hire in chunks. So the department grows 20 or 30 officers at a time, and then it shrinks incrementally. So even at 440, we won't be at 440 very long if we ever get there. We'll get to 440, and then there'll be attrition below that. And then we'll have another academy, and then that'll creep down as attrition comes in. So our goal is to get as close to 440 as we can. And we believe in 2018, we will be at or near 440 for most of the year.
Thank you.
Eric and Suzanne, excuse me, John, Suzanne.
Sure.
Go ahead, John.
I'm up, down. You know,
Right off
this is
the list, sorry.
a tiny amount of money, but it'll be important to some people. This TAPSA, you've assumed $50,000 for next year, but their plan is they will only refill. So if they've only spent $4,000 this year, they only plan on being taxed for $46,000.
Correct. And in first quarter, we'll true that up.
Okay, so you're just letting that go for now.
Correct.
Suzanne and then Fred.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Question for Lance regarding the changes in existing programs funding for 2018. Would you provide a little more detail on the 5.88 million number in terms of what that includes?
For the police department?
Yes.
So I think primarily, most of those numbers are just salary adjustments inside, but there may be some other non-labor pieces. I would have to get back to you on what the specificity of those are.
Okay.
Yeah, I can do that.
Fred?
Yeah, so trying to get up to speed on all this. I think, from my perspective, a couple of your answers to Mr. Cross, excellent questions, maybe missed the mark. Really ask, how about zero budget?
Zero-based budget.
Yeah, starting out from ground zero. And your answer was, you kind of go through that process, but you start out with the contracts and personnel costs. I understood Mr. Cross' question. You wouldn't start out with personnel costs, because there'd be functions you may not elect to do or do at different level. So help me out.
So in a continuation budget, we take.
No, you were speaking of continuation budget? Okay, all right. All right, so bear with me here. We will hear people saying, well, there's too much fat, you gotta cut back on stuff. And that's great theory, and people on my end of the political spectrum probably beat their chest and talk about that a lot. For the state budget, 70% of the budget's out of control. And the legislation, the governor can't do anything about it because it's formula driven. You know, whoever comes in the door qualifies for welfare, for education, health and human services. So, you know, but then you're talking about, at the end of the day of this process, I'd kind of like to have a rough idea of what parts of our budget are out of control and that we can't do any darn thing about it unless we change the qualifications, you know, of the people.
Very little of our budget is in that category.
Yep, but the one that's on the table right now, so that, what happens if the police have a lot more business or firefighters have a whole lot more fires than they were planning on? That gets, first way you deal with that is overtime, you know, and then maybe, you know, borrow firefighters from somewhere else or something, and so on and so forth. So, the police and fire must, in their budget proposals, figure out, you know, that there's, historically, you know, there's been some swing just because of customer demand, if you will. But I'd like to get a little bit of a handle on what that is. I don't need accuracy. You know, but generally speaking, does the demand for fire services swing 8 or 10% either way each year, or something like that. I'll bet you've got some historical data. You can imagine what the firefighting people in California, what's happening with their budget right now, and how the heck you plan for that. But it's a reality.
And the fire chief will be up in a few minutes, and he can help you, he can talk about that. In terms of police, there's relatively little change in the cost structure based on the sort of the external conditions of the community. We have the police we have, and they're either busy or too busy, somewhere in the middle of that. There is some ability through overtime to add staff, and would be necessary for special call-outs, things like that for special situations. And those can be expensive, but those are not typically a large percentage of their budget.
I'm a little surprised at that, but yeah, I'm glad to know that. You know, it's here on the street, stuff about the abuse of
Overtime.
overtime by senior employees and so on.
I think you'll see that in the police department, on a per employee basis, overtime is much lower than it has been in recent years. And that's it for two reasons. One, because we have more officers now, and the need for individual overtime is less. And two, because we have more officers, the overtime that is allocated on a per officer basis, the average is less. So I don't know that that's true on the fire department side, but it is on the police side.
Yeah, and as I understand it, recent presentation, we had a significant increase in fire departments. Ours is having to do with medical services, not fires and so on. So, yeah, I guess Mr. Bosky and I and several others here predict that the extra police officers are needed because of the extra demand for services during the last couple of years.
That's correct.
Yeah, and many things I agree with this mayor about. All right, thank you.
Ms. Dembowski and then Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Dyson's much nicer than I am. I don't call it a need for services, I call it crime. But I want to go back. Ms. LaFrance actually asked the same question I was going to ask, but when you break out those categories as far as that 5.8 million, I would like to see, when you initially gave your presentation, you said there might be some one-time expenditures in there. Give us a clue what those are. But also, when you're breaking out the labor, it'd be nice to see the rep versus the non-rep that's within that number. Sure. That'd be helpful. And my other question was, when it comes to the police and fire retirement system and medical liability, how much of the $64,000 is being associated with police and fire medical trust, if any?
So for police and fire, you'll see a similar number on fire. Yes, there's a change as well. So your question was the percentage or the percentage?
Yeah, so it's basically for the medical trust, right?
It's for the medical liability.
Yeah.
That's the 65,000.
So between the two, we're talking about 130,000 probably. So that's where's that number coming from? Is it just pure claims that you're anticipating, or is it? I don't understand.
The Police and Fire Medical Trust is a system that makes contributions to individual employees to offset their, what they would otherwise pay for insurance. So it's not a claims expense, it's the employee contribution. So if the cost of the plan goes down, then the per employee cost goes down. This is a result both of the population shrinking and the cost structure changing. So I don't know which is contributing more to the $65,000 reduction for police or the $130,000 total reduction, whether it's fewer beneficiaries or whether it's a plan change. But we can certainly get you that.
Yeah, I was just curious to see what was driving that.
Right, because like fire sensors.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson and Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm looking in my budget book, Lance.
Okay.
On page PD 12 of the police department, and it's talking about costs for Girdwood, and it's listed as $635,000 for 2018. I'm wondering, does that include the $200,000 that the state gave us, or is that $200,000 coming in somewhere else?
Does not include the 200.
So we're going to be spending, or proposing to spend $835,000 on police and Girdwood.
No.
No.
The $635,000 is the money that Girdwood is generating themselves through a local assessment
Okay.
that will pay primarily for the contract that we have with the city of Whittier to provide police services just in Girdwood. And then there was a separate state grant that was provided in the capital budget for policing services just on the highway.
Okay.
So we have two separate functions. And it is APD that is spending that $200,000 with intermittent patrols on the Seward Highway, starting October 1 and lasting as long as the grant lasts, probably March or April of 2018.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The question Chris asked, does that mean APD is not enforcing Girdwood? The answer is yes.
At all.
Girdwood, Whittier enforces in Girdwood. Suzanne?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Quick question about positions. In under fire, I know it just mentions one position eliminated due to SAP. But in general, and there are a number of positions identified on page 9. Are these primarily due to attrition, or will there be surplusing?
So it's a combination of both. Some
Okay.
folks were just hired on specifically for SAP.
Right.
And then some people were assigned that on their other,
Okay.
few of those, so it's a blend.
Okay, so for page 9, all those, and I know you mentioned you'd talk about them later, we can assume that there's a combination of both attrition and
Right.
surplusing at the end of the year. Okay, thank you.
Okay, Lance, we're back to you again, sir.
Good questions, thank you. So let's move on to fire. In the fire department, what you see here is from 2017 to 2018, as Ms. LaFrance just mentioned, they have a position in there that was identified as an SAP position. While they were doing some functions with SAP, you'll see the salary adjustments, including the reductions and eliminations of that SAP position. The balance is the total net increase of labor and other issues there, about $2 million. Retirement system liability, Sadowski, you know, this one here is actually up, and I'll find out what the reason for the split. A water utility bill change that we show here. Hayward has some changes as well. 2018, the chief and the administration have started an academy. We started it in November, and the assembly funded portions of that this year. The remaining costs of that will occur probably in January of 2018. This is the second half of that. There's a recommendation to increase for some overtime, knowing that ambulance 81 and 82 are going to continue in service. And then the chief has then another academy, which would be an attrition academy, or an academy in September that would staff the 2 ambulances that would be on the bond in April, and we'll talk about that on the next slide. When those ambulances are purchased, fitted, outfitted, and delivered, it will be roughly the same time in which this academy will be graduated, so we'll have those individuals available. The result is an increase in the fire department of 12 positions, and we show those costs in the bottom, about almost $500,000 for those 12 positions starting in September. And then this is the second half of the certificate of participation. We've reduced their budget in 18 by a little more than $5 million. And then Girdwood Valley Service Area, they have an adjustment approved by the Girdwood Board of Supervisors to increase some dollars down there to support fire department in Girdwood. So those are the big changes in the fire department. As we mentioned before, and you'll see in the next copy on the capital program, last year the administration proposed a bond for 2 new ambulances that included the operation maintenance in the bond. This proposed budget does not do that. It proposes the ambulances, but the staffing is inside the budget as a whole. So those are the changes for the operating side, and we can talk about that before we go to capital, if that's okay with Mr. Chairman. If you have
Absolutely.
questions. Thank you.
Eric, you're first, then Forrest.
I think you talked me out of it. for
Okay,
this round.
Forrest?
Yeah, I think so too. I was looking at here and I was trying to figure out why with one academy we were holding steady, there would be attrition, but I'm looking at the detail on FP7, it looks like we actually have 2 academies, is that right? So we have
Right.
one for the ambulances and one to
We have a finish, we have a finish of one, but we're only, we actually show the academy, we show a 17 academy that we're finishing.
Yeah.
And then a 19 academy we're starting, so that's one academy, that's
Okay.
why we showed that.
So that's why we're held steady.
Correct.
Gotcha. Thank
Any
you.
other questions before we move on? Go ahead, Lance.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'm sorry, Ms. Dombrowski, ma'am.
I'm always forgotten about. So,
No.
You're just so shy, it's hard to...
So my question is this, is there any funded but not filled positions that are being held in the fire department?
No. We've converted all of the funded but unfilled positions basically to senior executive staff, and we've reclassified those to dispatchers, mechanics, or one that we're proposing right now is a new battalion chief to fill the vacated dispatch supervisor.
Okay, so that assistant chief from the lower 48 that is no longer with us, that's back in the lower 48, that's the position?
That's the position we're reclassifying to be a battalion chief dispatch supervisor.
Anything else, ma'am?
Ironically, I just want to point out, that was part of the pitch and why we needed to give good raises for the fire department so we can fill that position.
No, it wasn't.
Yeah, you got it.
No, we needed to fill assistants.
Okay, Lance, let's move on. They can argue back and forth later. Go ahead, Lance.
We've never intended to fill that position, not for a year and a half.
Rule them out of order, Mr. Chair.
Lance, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, the next slide here is, as I mentioned in the fire department, we have 4 capital projects. Some of these will be specific to fire and some of them will be area-wide. For example, the communications replacement, that'll be an area-wide, that will be an area-wide. There's about 230 handheld radios right now that are 10 to 15 years old. Vendor does not support them, and so there's a need to replace all of those. Those will be the ones that basically are on every engine, every apparatus, and with staff members on shift. The next one, the ladder truck, that's a scheduled replacement. The fire department does have a scheduled replacement. I think this piece of equipment's about 15 years old. Maybe you can correct me on there. I'm not sure of the exact location. I believe it's at Fire Station 4. But,
Is that by the whole thing? They're about $1 million things?
yeah. The life pack, these are, we have an annual program here that you'll see, but this is replace the life pack cardiac monitors that they use. And then the last one that I mentioned, the one I want to mention is the new ambulances. Those will be an area-wide, that will be on an area-wide, likely on an area-wide bond as we develop the bond package in December. So there's really no surprises on this one. It looks very much like the one that we had last year. I think the addition is the amount on the communications, which is something that the chief is looking forward to, and I believe that they need. So that's where the fire department's capital program is being recommended.
We have a couple questions for you. Ms. Dombrowski,
Thank you.
Mr. Constant, and Mr. Dyson.
For the radio communication replacement, is that including CBFD? Because we have area-wide EMS, so. if we
Include the
want-
radios at GBA?
No, that does not.
So is this?
This is just fire, so if there was an EMS component to that, oh, no, excuse me, I apologize, this is fire department. I don't believe this includes, currently radio needs for CBFD, is that, or
Correct.
KDFD, for that matter. Yeah.
So, with Girdwood and Shuyak, you said there was an issue with the radios.
For the ones that the chief had identified here inside the.
Okay, so not across the board, just there's.
Correct. If you recall in discussions that we've had previously, we're going to radios by seat, not radios by person. So that bond proposal initially was closer to $2.5 million, and through our discussions, we dropped it down about $1 million just to staff seats. But to my knowledge, that does not include Girdwood or Chudiak, because I wasn't aware that they needed to replace their radios.
I don't know that they do, but I want to make sure, just because we're area-wide EMS, if they don't get forgotten. And then the other question I had, okay, I get the ambulances, what ladder truck has to be replaced?
That actually is a proposal to replace truck 11. You might be familiar with that.
No?
However, the challenge that the fire department has that's not shown here is our entire IT infrastructure, all the automatic mapping, the GPS systems, the monitors, and the apparatus. Most of that is not supported by vendors anymore. The two grants that we applied for, we both received notice this month that we were rejected. Anchorage is not looked upon favorably by those people that allocate monies out to communities. We're the largest community in Anchorage. Most people think it's self-sustained. So we may have to redirect a portion of that money to IT infrastructure needs. That's an actual conversation we're having at the DC level right now. But initially, that was intended to replace truck 11.
Okay, so still going back to math books?
We have math books, yes, we do.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Constant, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chief. I was on a tour recently of one of the firehouses, and they were showing off some innovative technology, new equipment that is battery powered instead of gas and engine powered. And I'm curious where you have innovation built into your budget.
Well, one of the things, to answer Mr. Dyson's question about grassroots and Mr. Cross' question, the last time the fire department did a grassroots build-up of their whole infrastructure in costing was in 2008. We've actually initiated a re-review of that through this new review. We're approaching everything with an open eye. Right now, the fire department is pretty set in having 13 fire stations and supporting, of course, the Girdwood and GDS volunteers with what you've heard of the 97 seats, which is staffing all of the ambulances, tenders, trucks, and engine companies as they're distributed right now. We recognize that distribution has to change. We've relocated Station 3, we've relocated Station 9. There's been tremendous growth on the east side of the city that hasn't been accounted for, particularly and then up in the Mountain View area. So as we do a complete refresh, again, of the departments, any and all opportunities to do things creatively, for example, moving from diesel-powered ambulances to gasoline, where they came in with the new emissions requirements for ambulances. The way we start and stop and go fast really quick, it's killing us from a maintenance perspective. So when we reassessed our operating costs on ambulances, we're moving back to gasoline models. And we'll take any suggestion, anytime, anywhere. And thank you for visiting the station.
Thank you.
Mr. Dyson, sir.
Yeah. So, it sounds like a nitpicking, but for the fire staff vehicle replacements, how many vehicles is that, Dennis?
We have no funding right now to replace any of the non-bonded equipment that we have. So these are the battalion chief's emergency response vehicles. These are all of the vehicles that fire protection investigators and inspectors use. We've got about 40 to 45. We've built out a 5-year replacement plan, and it's about $300,000 a year. The greatest need that we have.
So my question is, how many? What does 290,000 buy us?
Well, in this particular case, this is a proposal to replace one vehicle, which is our rehab van. When firefighters move out of a burning structure, they have to decompress, they have to refresh their air bottles. We have an old people mover bus that we're using which is a Petri dish.
Okay.
So this one proposal is one vehicle.
Okay, when you, all right, that wasn't all clear there, that was confusing. Because it said, okay, I guess it does say vehicle, not vehicles. So, you say you rotate your battalion chief's cars or whatever it is every 5 years? Is that what you said?
The last time the battalion chiefs were replaced was 2012. We had a state legislative grant. Every one of those vehicles is about 130,000 miles right now. So within the next 2 years, we'll need to replace those.
All right.
But nominally, we're looking at moving from excursions of Suburbans to pickup trucks with enclosed cabs and downsizing all of our vehicles. So it's nominally $40,000 per vehicle.
All right, thank you.
So about 8 to 10 a year.
Mr. Whittleton?
I'll skip.
Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The new ladder truck, I thought we got a new ladder truck this year with a longer ladder.
Truck one.
And so is the new one, are we getting another truck with a longer ladder or?
No, we wouldn't, that's the tiller, that's the tractor-driven apparatus that has the Kramer mobile cab in the back, right, as we affectionately call it. We would probably not put a tiller in Eagle River / Kodiak. And what we have is placeholders going on for the next 5 years of what we should replace. That as we come to making that decision, we regroup, we reevaluate, and we reprioritize.
Okay.
But the ladders are all pretty much the same height. Nominally, it's 100 to 110 feet for all of the ladders.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Before I go to Mr. Nabowski, Chief, I got a question for you. Speed bumps. Our fire trucks don't like them. Why did the state put one on Dowling Road under the roundabout? Put 2 speed bumps. Did they have your permission, or did they even tell you they were doing it?
I personally was unaware. The one advantage to a roundabout, of course, is you're driving very slowly to begin with. And we're actually testing what's called the speed cushion or speed pillow design right behind Old Station 3. It's set up and it's marked, it's painted, and we're driving all of our apparatus over that at varying speeds to test what is tolerable and what is not tolerable. And we're feeding that back through to the traffic department, through Stephanie Mormello, who's feeding that back to DOT. So we try to be proactive in letting them know what we can tolerate and what we can't tolerate.
The reason I ask you is I get a lot of complaints from my constituents. Why can't we get a speed bump? But in the roundabout, now the state put 2 in. Just want to know if they talked to you guys about the impact on fire trucks. Mr. Nabowski?
Thank you. It just occurred to me, something that's not on there that in past years has consistently been on is something to do with the shop. How are we doing with the shop now? I know in past years, I know we were doing Station 3 moving, there was a lot of movement and updating on single supplies.
Well, we realized that money is tight, so we prioritized it. So recall this year, in April, the voters did approve a bond for a new roof. 1981 is when the structure was first commissioned, so it does need a new roof. When we vacated Old Station 3, which is immediately adjacent to the maintenance shop, and went to the new station on Bergall, those 3 apparatus bays became available to the maintenance shop, so we're able to expand into that area. So that has taken some of the stress off of the older building.
Is that all, Mr. Nabowski? Mr. Dyson, sir, and then we're going to move on to maintenance and operations.
Yeah. Since I got into this job, one of the things that has surprised me is the demand for your medical services, ambulance, and so on and so forth, which, if I picked up on what was being said, a lot of calls to homeless people, lots of, real and imaginary, or real, or look like they're real medical emergencies on the street. Would you, if I'm right, would you rehearse with me a little bit the increase you've seen over the last, whatever, 3 or 4 years. And what you expect that to continue to increase?
Mr. Dyson, the statistic that we've used the last time we added a mobile intensive care unit, an ambulance, into the system was in 2010, when we added Medic 7 at Station 7. Extrapolating out this year's runs to date, and comparing that to 2010, we're up almost 48% in the number of transports, with no increases in fleet size. That's why we're advocating for 2 new additional ambulances. In just a general sense, it's 5 to 7% per year growth in number of transports. And so we fully expect that trend to continue and perhaps increase a bit as the relative age, the median age of people in Anchorage begins to grow.
Begins to get older. Mr. Dyson?
Better said.
I hope not to be a part of that.
We're ready if you were.
Forrest, did you have a
I just
question?
wanted to know, police and fire are our 2 largest departments, so it makes sense we're spending this much time on it, but we have 9 more departments to get to during the next 45 minutes, and then we've got the rest of the time afterwards.
Thank you for your observation.
Yeah.
Lance?
Right.
Amy, do you have something?
I have one that just came to me, I just have to ask,
Yeah,
and
it's
I
like the
don't
one we
see
had
it
next
here,
Friday.
I think I know the answer,
Yeah.
but I'm not
So I don't want us to rush.
any proposals for rate closures or reallocations or
Correct.
anything like that.
If there is any, I wouldn't say closures, but if there were any reallocation of our distributed assets, that's going to come through the fully vetting of this standard of cover that was last done in 2008. And then any proposal would obviously be vetted through the municipal manager, the mayor, and the assembly. But it'll all be data driven, and then on top of the data will be the emotion. But
Yeah,
we will
well,
vet that completely
Yeah,
before we make
and I
a
like to
decision.
make the pitch right now, and I think we talk about this all the time. I'm always very skeptical when I see ladder or truck 11 ever being talked about, simply because it's been the source of contention for many years, right? Last we spoke, that is a 4-man ladder truck, but it's being run as a 3-man rig, right?
I believe right now it's a 4-person.
In this budget, or?
And then the side letter that we've operated with the International Association of Firefighters for almost a year, decreasing the number of 4-person staff apparatus from 8 to 5. That goes back to fully 8, December 31st, when the side letter expires. And we're able to do that because we're authorizing me to spend additional overtime to keep 81 and 82 staff while returning to the 4-person income. So it's 4-person.
So that's all accounted for in your 28
Yes.
budget, all right?
Mr. Constant, quick question, sir, and then we're moving on.
We had a follow up on Amy's point there. What's happening with the tender number 9? Is it in this budget?
Tender 9, as we speak today, remains out of service to help close on 2017 anticipated deficit, which right now we're not showing a deficit in 2017 because of that particular action. In 2018, it is in the continuation budget. The question we're going to ask when we do the standard of cover review is if we were able to survive the past, not survive is the correct word, but if we were able to successfully respond for the past 4 months without that, do we need it? And that'll be part of the vetting conversation that we'll have with anyone.
Thank you.
But right now, it remains out of service through the end of the year, if it generates overtime.
Lance, you're next.
Thank you. So the next department is maintenance and operations. This is Alan Chudowski's group. So everything in facilities and street maintenance is handled by Alan and his staff. Got 153 folks in his shop and some seasonals. So basically, we made some minor adjustments in 2000. Thank you, Chief. We had some adjustments in fleet rental rates since the fleet rental rate charges affect Alan, who manages the fleet. Made some adjustments in general obligation bonds. We know that the debt service, based on bonds that were passed for those projects that are managed under there, there's a debt for that for those previous bonds are illustrated in this department. Again, some adjustments in salaries for 2018, and then I have to find out exactly what the $143 is for the hotel motel tax. I think it has to do with one one or two particular facilities, but I'll find out. And then in 2018, as I mentioned 3 weeks ago, when I gave an overview of the budget, the administration is proposing to put about $500,000 as a contingency inside Alan's budget to help manage and plow priority pedestrian and transit routes, which will also include in cases of streets. Those priorities are set, will be done both with transit and street maintenance, as well as if we're going to be maintaining sidewalks or streets on state rights of way. We work with the state of Alaska to figure out where those allocations will be. And I know that'll be a big part of the success for the transit service that takes effect next Monday and winter, so that'll be a great help for them. And then the balance of it, we did ask street maintenance to take a proposed reduction when we built the budget. And so what you see here is you have some changes in their personnel. The one position in the electronic tech, I believe that one is a filled position.
It's filled right now, it'll be vacant by the first of the year.
And then the other two, I believe the other two are, we show them as vacant as right now, currently vacant positions, so. Yep, so those are the changes that are proposed inside the street maintenance folks. Any of the other reductions that you see in here are not related to any of their street or snow removal services. They relate to mostly the facilities process. So Alan and his group do a great job, and I think their proposal's pretty solid here. If you have any questions on street maintenance, I'll move on to the
We have a
capital
few
programs.
questions. John's first.
I have a question. So if we do state roads, I know we've been trading even Steven, but you're kind of proposing here that we may fix them up without reimbursement. But Eagle River does some state roads, and they're paid in material by the state. And that may happen on the hillside. I had to talk to Bob Anderson yesterday morning. Can we get reimbursed some way?
Sometimes. There are occasions where there's a little horse trading that goes on of the sort that you described. Subverse is a great example of that. And from time to time, there are exchanges, I would suggest at the staff level, not necessarily at the appropriation level, that take place where there's a little bit of bartering that goes on. Typically, it's service for service. I'll plow your road this week because your grader is out of service, and you plow it next week. But occasionally, there are these deals where they'll trade material, whether it's recycled asphalt or gravel or other material.
But you're assuming we might not get reimbursed, and we're just going to pay.
This is not in anticipation of reimbursement. If we use this on state routes, and it's not for sure that we would, it depends on how much snow we have and where the state is, where they might need the help, then Alan Chakowski would make a day-by-day decision in working with his state counterparts and say, okay, you guys can't plow these 3 roads that have transit or school or just general population benefits. You're not going to plow them for a week. We want you to plow them tomorrow. And we will pay, typically it's not going to be paying the state the money. It's going to be paying the hauling companies. When the state has to plow sidewalks because of the way their sidewalks are configured, typically there's no place to store the snow from their sidewalks. They either put the snow back in the road and then the road plow puts it back on the sidewalk, or they just don't move it from the sidewalk at all. So you have to haul it. And that is what the state hauling budget has been reduced dramatically over the last 5 years. And that is what we would likely use that $500,000 to do, is within ARDSA. This is ARDSA money, so it could only be used in ARDSA. We would agree that either our hauling contractors or the state's hauling contractors, and frequently there's a lot of overlap between the two, would do work on state routes, and that's new for us. We've not done that before.
Anything else, John? I've got others.
Thanks.
Eric, you're next.
Two quick questions. We still have a Torah. They're just not necessarily keeping to the word of the Torah?
No, the Torah is somewhat separate. They are maintaining their obligations under the Torah. This would be above and beyond that.
Okay. And I think for Lance, I'm sorry, I just didn't understand. Can you one more time quickly on the second item, the how we got savings from a reduction in fleet rentals that might have to do with a bond? What is that again? $1 million, $1,350,000, second item on your
So
list.
that's not necessarily related to bonds.
Okay, what is it?
So basically, the fleet fund, we were using a fleet fund to support our purchases in 2018 from the fleet, from the M&O department.
Purchases of vehicles,
Right,
purchases
so
of
last year we took $1 million from M&O fleet fund to support purchase of vehicles all across the city. Typically, departments contribute to that fund.
And you
that
reduced
year-
the rate, so the contribution for these guys went down. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Forrester?
Yeah, just very briefly, it says reduce roof reserve contribution, 140,000. Can you explain that a little bit? How are we able to reduce our contribution to the roof reserve?
So, 8 or 9 years ago, the municipality set up a structure whereby it replaced the roofs on the Sullivan, the museum, and the Lusac, and then it began to make a contribution to a depreciation account, a sinking fund, pick your term of art, of about $100,000 per roof per year. So we took tax money and we stuck it into a fund in anticipation of having to replace those roofs at some point in the future, so that when that replacement was required, we wouldn't have to go back to the bonds for a new roof. We would have the money already saved up. It was an experiment, because we don't do that for the other 150, but however many other roofs that we manage. So this year, we reevaluated those contribution rates. Are the roofs lasting as long as we thought they would? Will they last longer than we now think, now that they're 10 years into their useful lives? And we were able to reduce the annual contribution, because the roofs are going to last at least as long or longer than they were originally anticipated to last. So we have more time to build up the reserve before the reserve will be spent. And so and I don't know, there was 3 different calculations, one for each roof. And I don't know which roof how we divided that. But the facility maintenance crew did an evaluation of the roofs, recalculated the contribution rate. We were also able to anticipate lower cost replacement costs. Roofing projects are less expensive now than they were 10 years ago. Some of that is technology, or the cost of the materials. Some of that is the technology associated with the application process. So we're not seeing the inflationary pressure that we anticipated when we built the initial calculations for the roof reserve amount.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sorry to ask.
Mr. Dyson, sir?
I was thinking about Bill Falsey having to answer this next year. To be sure.
He's still collecting. His rep's got to get
Yeah,
replaced.
thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Dyson?
I wish you were right about what's happening in Eagle River. But I have, hiring a qualified contractor to do snow removing routes really well. Cheaper by lane mile, and generally a day and a half faster than here in Anchorage. But that's not a fair comparison, because they do very little snow hauling, and so on and so forth. I had a brilliant idea that the Eagle River area take over all the state's responsibility for state roads there. And while I was patting myself on the back, I realized, as usual, Anna McKinnon was 2 years ahead of me with the idea and proposed it to the state. And Mark Lucan, the DOT director's old friend, and for some reason I can't define, he is waffling on the deal. But it's one where everybody wins. I have suggested to this administration that they explore the idea of having contractors do most of the work here that's not done by the little road districts around. And one back of the envelope estimate I got was at least 20% saving, probably better service. But there are complications with snow storage and falling and all those kind of things. Have not heard back from the administration. My guess is nothing will happen on that. But to integrate it all, that's one thing that could be contracted out. And of course, there would be union contract issues and so on and so forth. Very logical idea. My guess is nothing's going to happen in the short haul. I intend to push on it in the longer period, but there are real problems in doing that, which seems so logical. You're right on track.
Tim?
Yeah, most of my question has been answered, but Mr. Abbott, in terms of the snow, the state requirements down my neck of the woods, we got a lot of flack last time in terms of sidewalks and cul-de-sacs or roundabouts or cul-de-sacs is what it was, but. And you're saying we did not account for, or we did not reach an agreement with the state to pick up that work, or are we just hoping it's going to be a low snow summer or winter this time?
Be a little snow summer for sure.
Answering your second question first, we budgeted for what we believe is an average snow year.
Yeah.
Last year was an above average snow year, and that led to, in some cases, slower than typical response time or completion times for plowouts. In terms of the state is reducing its level of effort in for this winter. Their budget was cut again, and so they have about the same number of people, but they have less money for overtime and less money for hauling, which I talked about a few minutes ago. So that will, by the state's own admission, that will reduce their level of effort. Snow plowing is not an 8 to 5 job, and without a meaningful overtime budget, you cannot meet the community's expectations for hauling. The community expects that on snowy days, plow operators are typically working 12-hour shifts instead of a 10-hour shift, or 14 or 16 hours in some occasions. The state is basically saying this year, other than emergency situations, and they will do what it takes to keep the Glen and the Seward highways clear. But beyond that, they say they are not going to use very much overtime this year, less than they did last year.
We've got a lot of state roads down there
the majority
I think
of the
just
arterial,
ignoring it is not going to solve it, or hoping for a low snow year. There needs to be a fallback position where either the state will do it when we ask them to do it, or we do it and give a chargeback of some sort. But that takes agreement on both sides to have a contract.
It does. We have suggested that the state should treat snow removal like they treat wildfires, that they budget a minimum amount and then they recover the cost through supplemental budgeting or whatever the real costs are. That has not yet been adopted.
Well, I was hoping we were going to have a trade-off of roads, basically.
And we have.
Okay.
But right now, the trade-off is basically a 1-to-1. We have not, I think if you strictly counted the number of lane miles and the amount of effort, we're probably taking on a little bit more work than the state is, but not dramatically more. Because there are taxes and we're only legally responsible for the city routes. This $500,000 increment that we're proposing for the maintenance and operations operating budget is really the first significant acknowledgement that the city may have to take on direct responsibility for state roads above and beyond these sort of TORA arrangements that we have done in the past, if we want to see a level of snow removal service that we think the community expects. And this may be the wave of the future.
Mike, we're gonna move on. It's just, you're absolutely right, though. Our constituents don't care who plows it. They simply want it plowed, and they won't take the answer. That's a state road, call the state.
That's what
Doesn't
you
make
see
them
the
happy.
mayor reacting to with that $500,000 increment.
But I heard the new director of the Mental Health Lands Trust says we can dump our snow on their property at no cost. Lance, you wanna go ahead? I see no disagreement on that.
The sidewalks are a major concern for older folks who walk to the stores.
We agree.
Have to walk in the street carrying bags
students.
back.
Yep.
Especially with the new bus
Anyway,
system.
bus stops.
So the capital budget.
Okay,
for
Lance,
maintenance
capital.
I'm gonna
operations.
scream. Problem.
So here's the capital budget. So these projects obviously are a blend. You should have seen these before. We got some improvements, some minor improvements up at Fire Station 10 up in Bear Valley, Fire Station 11. Some there's a section of the roof to get replaced out there. As I mentioned before, the Anchorage area-wide radio network is a statewide communications system that allows our local, state, and federal agencies to communicate interoperably in the event of an emergency or they need some assistance. The state is upgrading their system. This is a portion in which we would then complement that and upgrade our network as well. Some work out of the animal control roof. APD headquarters, basically, and that building I think was built in '85. I believe my memory serves, that building was, so they're working on the same basic heating and HVAC structures in there, and then some work out at the training center. Last year we did have some money in the training center, but it was internal for remodeling and their training event. This one's mostly on the roof, HVAC. Street lights going to LED, and then some work in the maintenance facility. Again, these projects will all be pretty much managed by maintenance and operations, but as you can see, that area-wide network is an area-wide service for area-wide communication. So, and as Mr. Dunbar mentioned earlier, there's a significant amount of state projects. We just noted that there that magic list, if you look at the capital improvement budget and program, you'll see a list of that 53 million we just didn't add to the sheet here.
And that,
Go ahead, Eric.
yeah, just real quickly, so Forrest's point was, we're not sure we can count on that. Is it part of the capital budget? We just don't know what's gonna get cut? Is it yet to be added?
No, it is, there's a list of the projects in there. There are significant projects to our major facilities that were built in the area.
And they were passed in this last budget, or they?
No, they're proposed for state funding in this budget. When you look at the capital.
But usually the
Doesn't mean
budget
you've
that
got
they
money.
did, well, right, the capital budget that they did in the regular session, sitting here in October, would have had 18 projects, 2018 projects in them, right?
This will be for their next session.
Okay, next one, thanks.
We had a similar line last year. He was like, "Here's all the stuff we want." They didn't put any of it in.
Okay, this is not past state, this is us requesting.
Correct.
Okay.
Lance, the last police chief wanted to bomb-proof the fire department, the police department, because you walk in their area, it's open to the public, you could bring a bomb in there and blow up a friend into the building.
So
Is there money being put aside for that?
So in the state request, there's, I think, 3 or 4 phases of improvements to APD headquarters, and they include part of the reef configuration of the entrance into APD headquarters.
Again, that's dependent upon state funding.
Correct.
We're not putting on the bond package to our constituents.
Correct. We're not on this.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, sir.
Okay. The next couple departments, so public transportation, there's really no change in public transportation. They have a continuation budget from 17 to 18, and they had one staff change that they were moving into fund with grants. Pretty much looking forward to their service that they'll continue next year.
Four, sir.
So, Lance, I think these are
Felix.
probably questions that
And John.
Abdul Hassan would have to answer. But, so just looking through their detail on, I think, page 5, page 7 of their detailed budget. So we show our project-generated revenue dropping by more than $1 million.
Yep.
My understanding was that going to the ridership model, we were trying to get more fares, not less. So I guess I want an explanation of why we anticipate we're losing more than $1 million. Also, again, the other thing was they're adding one admin position, and then I just wanted to know why. What the admin position was supposed to do.
Well, let me answer the the first question first. So when we do a revenue projection for our department, and we expect, I hope that we'll get better performance out of this. When we use what we had budgeted in 2017, we look at the actuals and how they performed in 2017, and then we make some calculations for that. So the forecast is based on primarily where we believe the 2017 actuals would be, which is based on the existing system. We don't really know how much more revenues we'll generate. I think the board has stated that obviously with more frequency, there's an opportunity for more ridership or more fares. But that, and we'll have 5 months to look at that new system in the first quarter if we have the ability to make adjustment, we'll do it for the revenues. That's why that was the case. And then your second question had to do with a staffing person, particularly an admin.
Just real quickly, before you get off that, so you didn't make any adjustment for the change in model? You just took, like you would have if we hadn't made this model change?
That's right.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, on their administration on G7, that page, you can see they're going from 4 to 5 positions, and I'm just wondering why. Page 7.
Yep, no, I will find out. I don't recall, but that's a simple question to answer.
Anything else for us?
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Felix?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Hassan's not here, so I was going to ask how we are doing in preparation for Monday. I don't know if you can. We're good.
Yeah. We're launching on Monday with the new route structure. You're welcome to join me at 5 o'clock in the morning. As we
all right,
send
I'll put that in my calendar.
Yeah, check your calendars. I believe you're all available. 5 o'clock.
Where are you going to be?
On me.
Where are you going to be?
At the bus park.
Okay.
The cake.
I'm
5
there's
a.m.
another place.
5 a.m. on Monday.
Bus barn. Give me the bus
Yeah.
barn.
Wedding.
Felix, anything else?
yes, I do have more.
Anything else, Felix?
I do. Thank you, Mr. Chair. It seems like public transit, the budget isn't really being affected too much. Is there anything in this budget, though, that you think will have negative effects to that rollout of changes?
No.
Okay.
We expect to be able to operate the service that is starting on Monday throughout 2018 with this budget.
So, and last series of questions, Mr. Chair. I don't know if everyone got this resolution from the Public Transit Advisory Board, but the Public Transit Advisory Board has 3 specific requests for the budget, and I don't know if the administrations had a chance to look at this. I would. Okay, well, I would love to get your opinion. So the 3 requests are bringing back 2 service days that were cut in 2017, so 2 holidays for the amount of $147,000. Bringing back, adding some money for the fuel supply costs because fuel's gone up a little bit, $79,000, and then bringing back the reductions from the first quarter budget revisions of $375,000. So those are the 3 requests that I received from the Public Transit Advisory Board, and I'd love to get the administration's thoughts.
We will definitely provide you with those.
Thank you.
And could you give us a cost to replace those? There's a cost factor into it. I'd like to know what the fares would have to go up to cover that.
Okay.
John?
I think I heard you say mostly a continuation budget, so I don't have to put in an amendment for that $20,000 for Gurwood Valley Transit.
I will check that is a continuation. I'll confirm that.
Pete?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I had a couple people ask me where they could get a schedule for the new bus routes. Is that available online, or do they have cards,
yes.
or?
Yeah, if they go to muni.org, I think it's even on the front page of the Muni website, and it dominates the public transit website.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Lance, you want to continue, sir? There are no other questions I can see.
No, thank you. So the capital program for transit, again, as you know, it's a matching program. This is either the 10 or 20% match. And bus stop, I think most of that's going to go to C7, and then some support equipment, which is the fleet, and then some rehab at their campus out there at the wedding cake building, the barn, security, and the bus lot. Public Works admin.
Chris has a question for you, sir. Chris?
Yeah, so we are voting on a tax abatement for the new construction project out there. And how is all of that integrated into this budget here? Kind of what changes may come?
There will be no operational changes to the public transportation program from the Tudor Elmore redevelopment.
So the bus depot is going to remain the same?
Functionally the same. There may be facility change, minor facility adjustments or different driveways or things like that, but should not make a budgetary impact.
Okay.
Thank you, Lance. Go ahead.
Thank you. So the next, down to about the last 10 here, about 10 slides. So Public Works Administration, pretty minor changes in Public Works Administration. The one change is they, as part of our request to them to make some proposed reductions, they have, check my notes here. The one position that we have on the eliminated one full-time account position right now, the position is vacant, based on my records and what we have in our account. So that 131, that position is vacant. And then they're making some changes. They're moving one admin officer to a junior admin officer to make some savings on salaries and that. And then they have some changes in their machine repairs that they reduce. You'll see that PBX maintenance, you'll see a capital project inside IT where they're actually looking to replace our 20-year-old phone architecture system inside this building and across the municipality. So that's part of why that's being reduced. So that's what's going on the admin. If you have any questions, that's Moy Robinson's crew. Moy is a rock star, not only over there, but also on the SAP projects.
Yeah,
Questions from the Summit members?
It's not a $12 million agency. That is where all of the funding for the road boards lives. So that's where the Subversa, the LURSAs, Girdwood Board Supervisors money is. So Maury's program has an operating budget of, I don't know, $700,000-800,000, something like that. He's got a staff of 8 or 9 people. But they spend their department hosts all of the service areas that we've been talking about.
Questions from the Summit members? Mr. Dombrowski, ma'am.
I just want to make the comment because you're absolutely right when it comes to this department. And, I don't usually pop up and say something like this, but from Subversa's standpoint, I gotta tell you, they're rock stars.
Yeah.
They really are. They do a very good job.
have a radio show.
Both Morty and Marshall. I can't seem to praise high enough what they do with what they have.
Keep going, Lance.
Okay, the traffic department, over at the Mormello shop. So we just, very minor changes here. Actually, no staff changes in positions. They're making all their reductions and changes to professional services. There are some bond monies from previous bonds, so the O&M that would be accounted for those things related to traffic. They're added into that new budget. So pretty much the same on balance from one year to the next on the operating side. On the traffic side, as part of the road bond, these projects will be blended into these traffic projects will be blended into a road bond package. This area-wide signals maintenance, that's an annual program. They work a lot with the state. They work with PM&E on those things. The intersection safety, they work with the state of Alaska to identify where they have intersection or congestion issues or high rates of crash or turning movement problems. So there's a problem issues there. School zone safety, this is a recommendation we'll make, a project where it's ongoing as well. They build sidewalk connections, crosswalks, a variety of other things, and they work with the school district and community councils that recognizing where those priorities are. And then traffic calming and safety improvements, those are based on recommendations that come out of the planning process with community councils and neighborhoods. So those recommendations are
Almost, Lance, because I know when they want a study being done, they do a traffic analysis, but ultimately whether they get a speed bump or not is up to the fire department.
The fire department is part of that as is street maintenance, as is, but as the chief mentioned, the traffic calming program has come a long way in 10 years. The types of the things that they put in, the way they're designed, the markings of them, so that come along.
Michelle, the biggest complaint we get at the community council is speed bumps.
We expect
I wish we could help
the
you.
traffic department, through a combination of bond funds from previous years, bond funds we hope they'll get in 2018, as well as legislative grants that still have balances on them. We expect to spend between $1 and $2 million in the 2018 construction season on traffic calming projects around Anchorage. So it should be a good construction year for traffic calming projects.
Our constituents want to see that, so thank you, sir. Go ahead, Suzanne.
Mr. Abbott, did you say 28 million?
No,
No.
sorry, 1 to 2 million.
Oh, when did, I don't know what, wishful thinking on my part.
In 2018.
I liked your thinking.
So, project management engineering, this is Jerry Hansen's crew. So basically not a lot of significant changes here. They have one position change, converting a full-time person to a seasonal person, so I can't remember if that full-time person actually fills that enrollment or if it's taken. So,
Again, this program of the 38 employees starting next year that you see there, 32 of them, I believe, are funded by the capital program. So only, I believe, 6 positions, all of them in watershed management, are funded with tax dollars. The rest of them are funded by the capital projects, bonds and grants that are appropriated separately.
Mr. Costa has a question for you.
Yeah, you know, I always get these two departments screwed up, project management, engineering, and public works. But the issue of the alley paving or alley grading, where is that and how's that being resolved in this budget?
So that's in the maintenance and operations budget.
Right, okay, I missed it.
And we have a typical annual program where we would pave between 5 and 10 alley segments per year. And that is what we anticipate again in 2018.
But really, the issue that's become pressing in my neighborhood this year is the grading issue that, you know, the lunar landscape of our alleys downtown.
And you've seen street maintenance
Started.
hit that in the last week.
Yep.
As their crews have switched from summer maintenance to winter maintenance schedules, but there's no snow yet. So the graders are all out in force, and one of their projects is grading the non-paved surfaces, a lot of which are alleys. So that would typically be spring or fall work for the street maintenance crews.
Then there was a problem, though, and the problem was the state and the feds and the $200,000 fee. So what's the resolution of that?
We're gonna grade them anyway.
So we're just gonna take it on.
Yeah, there was some concern that the federal agents, the state had given up the regulatory program associated with gas, natural gas distribution systems, and because the federal program was more onerous than the state, if you somehow damaged a gas line, not a distribution line to a house, but a main line, that there would be these huge fines associated with it. We think we've hit one of those in the last 10 years. So the options were, we could either do very significant locating efforts, which were very expensive and took a lot of time to do, in an effort to make sure we fully reduce the risk of hitting a gas line, or we could just grade the alleys and take our chances with good practice, which has served us well in the past. That's what we're doing now.
Thank you.
Please continue.
this is a list of the capital projects. I'm not gonna go through each one of these. You'll see it a lot cleaner. It's on your capital budget, PM&E 1. I would like to highlight a couple of these. There's a significant construction projects in here, but there's also a lot of drainage improvements. But you'll see 92nd Avenue storm drain, which is about $2 million. That's a construction project that they're going to replace the storm drain in there. Academy and Vanguard, that is, for those of you who might not know what that is, it's on the Seward Highway. It's about where 92nd Avenue is. It's the new ramp that goes between the new Seward Highway and the old Seward Highway south of the mall complex there. Academy is the street that will run to the east. It will connect with the Abbott Loop. or Abbott Road over by Fred Meyer's. And so there'll be a realignment of that street. This is a right of way. There will be a construction hit in about 2 years for about $8 million. Campbell Woods subdivision over near off of Diamond in the Sand Lake area. That's phase one of multiple phases of a drainage and pavement improvements. Central Business District, that's an ongoing project. A lot of the infrastructure and utility work that we have downtown needs to be changed. And I think the last two that I just want to point out, we have some funds in there for Pleasant Valley Phase 1 construction, which is on the outside of Muldoon Curve. And then the last one would be a storm sedimentation treatment facility where we're making and cleaning out our storm drain systems, a facility which will pick up all of that product and then treat it. We'll need a facility to make sure that's the case. But there's a lot of different projects in here. There's a lot more detail in your capital budget. And then again, I'd like to just point you to the map and show you where all of these projects are all across Anchorage. And then the last one I want to mention is Eagle River CV Ursa. You'll notice in the other column, that's $600,000. That is self-assessment from CV Ursa, which they provide a match in their road program. And the one big project they have is Homestead Road Extension out in Eagle River area over the boils. So,
Mr. Bowski and then Mr. Steele.
Yeah, my question, you actually answered both of them, so I was just gonna verify that 600,000 where that was coming from. But the Homestead to Royals, how does this keep popping back up on our capital improvement project? Chugat Community Council goes ballistic every time.
well, I can.
Our community doesn't come in.
Comes from
Ursa.
Really?
Yeah, I think the recommendation when you see in the project.
Yeah, I know, that's
It's a
why.
recommendation from CV Ursa.
Well, that's why I was asking where it came from this year, because I know Chugat Community Council goes ballistic every time.
Would you get her to list the name of the people that refer it? She needs the name of the people she can give it to her for a hit list.
Thank you.
Mr. Steele?
Stormwater sedimentation treatment facility, where is that?
Not sure of the location of it.
There's an ongoing discussion about where it'll finally be located. The two options are either at the solid waste services facility at Central Transfer Station, or adjacent to the municipal snow dump at 102nd and C.
And there are obviously lines there that are going into that or by
No,
that
this is a
location?
place where essentially we would treat the sediment that had been pulled out of storm drains and other sediment basins. So typically a Vector truck or another device would remove the material, and then it would be trucked to this location to be treated and disposed of.
Just a note, I would like to get a graphic of that sediment treatment operation there on Spinard Road that was put in terms of how it operates.
Okay.
Their stormwater treatment.
The grid separator.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive.
Okay.
And Mr. Steele has volunteered to have that facility put in his assembly district too. To remediate
No way.
the soils.
Yeah,
His area,
right in
not
the
yours.
cul-de-sac there.
Go ahead, Lance.
Okay. Health and Human Services. So I want to point out here on Health and Human Services, it shows a reduction of 6 individuals. In reality, Health and Human Services is not losing any personnel. These are positions that were originally recognized in part, sometimes 0.15%, 0.2%, that are funded out of the operating budget. They are going to be funded with grants. And so, in confirming with Melinda yesterday and this morning, there are no positions to be lost. While it shows a -6, it's because they're not going to be supported with property tax and we need to grant. So that's a big point of change.
Eric has a question.
Why does it
too.
cost $150,000 to do that?
It doesn't. The 150,000, it doesn't. So that's the we blended maybe too much all into one line. That 150,000 would include all of the increases that are related to everybody in DHHS for like AMEA contracts. If they have anybody that works for.
Okay, so there was a big up and a partial minus,
Exactly,
and
right. So
they
the
netted out.
balance is 6 positions, but when you look at the entire department, there's an increase of 150.
The 6 position change is really only about $10,000.
That is
We were only contributing a few dollars per position. The rest of the money was being provided for with a state or federal grant.
So you go from 10% to 0 or 5% to 0, and it looks like you're losing 6 positions.
Right,
but-
it is, I'm not sure why we counted them as general government positions to begin with, considering we were contributing so little to their funding. But this, I think, certainly more accurately reflects that there are only 47 employees there that are general government employees. There's another, at least that many more, that are grant supported in that department.
Horace has a question. Horace?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, you might have already answered this, and I just sort of didn't understand, but why are we adding another quality position? What is that person doing? And the second question, which I assume you were gonna get to anyway, but, is the $500,000 we're adding for homeless services are here. I wanna know exactly what that is. $500,000 for homelessness, what does that mean? What projects are we funding with that?
So, we'll give you a better answer than I can provide right now on the change in status of the air quality position. So we'll have more information for you on that.
So just to be clear, that's a change in status, not a hiring position?
I believe that is correct.
Okay.
And then, in terms of the homelessness funding, there are a variety of internally competing proposals for how those funds would be used. Whether they would be used to subsidize housing, permanent supportive housing, whether they would be used to enhance shelter operations, whether they would be used to enhance services, i.e. Counseling and or social work services. There's a variety of internally supporting purposes. And we fully expect that we'll be talking to the Assembly about those choices before a final decision is made on that. And depending on the decision, it may actually be endorsed by, I mean, obviously, if we're gonna buy something of any dollar value, it's gonna have to come to the Assembly for approval. So, at this point, this is an allocation that the mayor has committed in the operating budget, but we have not yet landed on our recommended use of that fund.
So can I ask a quick follow-up? to
Go
that?
ahead, Forrest.
So I guess, so I thought you said one thing, and then at the end, it sounded like you might have said another.
Sorry.
If we vote to approve the budget, with this in there, at that point, by that time, will we know what this $500,000 is going for? Or will it be over the course of the next year, you'll be bringing, different projects to us?
I don't think we will have a firm proposal for you by November 21st. I could be incorrect, but I don't expect that to be. There are far more needs than $500,000 can resolve. So it is not a question of finding a need.
Right.
It is a question of selecting from among many. And that is the challenge, opportunity, that Mr. Falsey, the mayor, Ms. Burke will be working on to, over the next 1 to 3 months.
Mr. Abbott, we could take it out now and then put in first quarter budget revisions if in fact you've identified where the money is going to be spent.
And that certainly is correct. That would essentially, we would lose 6 months of the utility of that. I think I can commit on behalf of the mayor that we will present our recommendation on the use of this, or our plans for the use of this, perhaps to the Homelessness Committee, or through another vehicle of the Assembly's choosing, so that there would be communication between the Assembly and the administration before the funding was committed.
Mr. Dyson? Name Chris.
Yeah, thank you. So, I asked earlier about what parts of our budget, in a sense, are formula-driven. And it doesn't really fit the homeless situation perfectly. Because all you gotta do to qualify for somebody's business expenditures is to be here and come to our attention. And Nancy tells me, if I got it right, that we're spending
What language do they have to come back
$50,000
to us
per
about? The application.
homeless person.
Like the blank check.
Ethan says that that's on the 400 care hardcore, but
But you got at least.
no matter what it is, so, in the paper, I think it was 1,300 reported homeless. So those, and of course, there's no set formula for what we spend for each person. But anyway, you run the numbers, it gets north of 50 million bucks, you know, which in my world is not trivial. So that's the kind of thing I think of. But I think, as I've talked to the director over at Health and Human Services, most of the money we spend on, other than the homeless, all the treatment programs and all that kind of thing is not mostly municipal money, federal or state or whatever. All the city's doing is
Hire one of the
human
kids to
services.
represent.
That is correct.
Yeah, so that doesn't fit my category, but we do have to administer that. That's
We do. And there's,
context, but that's fairly fixed and won't go up and down a lot with the customers, clients, so on. All right. Yeah. Thank you.
I've got Chris and then Suzanne.
So, philosophically, I have, of course, challenges with writing blank checks, especially for homeless projects that almost inevitably end up in my neighborhood. However, I would suggest that $500,000 isn't enough to really do much of anything at all. And I would contemplate that the administration might have a kind of a plan A, B, and C if it's possible to identify additional funds, because park cleanup could take up more than that $500,000 just to mitigate the camps that are everywhere. And the police tell me that they can't actually tackle the clearing of the camps until they're cleaned, because people just move from old campsite to old campsite to old campsite. And that's not even including the human service aspect of providing supportive housing or treatment services or case management or any of the other things. And so I would hope that the administration comes up with a more aggressive approach to funding some of the things that can be tackled here, with an eye on the mind that we would like a kind of approval authority on how it's spent, not just a blank check.
Or we leave it out and do a first quarter budget revision.
Right.
And then come with a
Because
plan
just
to us.
$500,000 I think we could spend and not get all of our camps cleaned.
Suzanne, ma'am?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Excluding grant funds, just so I'm clear, how much then would we be spending in 2018 besides the $500,000 to address homelessness out of this budget?
there is some spending on homelessness programs associated with the Human Services Matching Grant Program, which is primarily state funded, although there's a local contribution to that. There are some homeless service providers that are grant recipients in that. I'll work with the department to get a more detailed answer to it, but to be honest, there are not a lot of pure municipal resources, tax-funded resources, that go to work on these programs. Assemblyman Dyson was generally correct in that most of the money that comes from the municipality is actually sourced from a state or federal funding stream. And we are somewhat directing it, CDBG monies and other things, but not necessarily funding it.
Anything else, Suzanne?
No, I would just add there is a strong public perception that the muni spends a chunk of the operating budget addressing homelessness. So it would be helpful to know the amount we do pay.
Our homeless chairman wants to talk to you. Felix?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Homelessness.
I'm on the border there. So, yes, there is, thank you, Mr. Chair, thank you, Ms. LaFrance, there is that public perception that we are spending a lot of money, and in a way we are spending a lot of money reacting to the problem instead of actually finding solutions to the problem. I would, though, attempt to dissuade my colleagues from saying we should wait until first quarter budget revisions to put in the money, because there are needs now. If we don't do this, people will die, and I want everyone to realize that. So, yes, we need to figure out a plan of how to use this money, and we can't write a blank check, but it needs to happen one way or another. Thank you.
That's the problem with the devil in details. Eric?
Yeah, what Felix said, no thanks. Good.
Forrest, sir?
Oh,
Hi, journalist. You don't, no comments?
He just always puts you down.
Okay. Go ahead, Lance.
Okay, we were down to the last 4 or 5.
That's right, I believe.
DHHS has a small capital project. These projects would be, they're included in the bond, would be blended in with DHHS, but they have some work out at the senior center, and there's some flooring or roofing issues there, and then some work out at the street center. There's more detail in the budget book, but basically that's where DHHS will be supporting. Municipal manager's budget, as in Mike's shop, he has the Emergency Operations Center, Transportation Inspection and Risk Management, and as you mentioned, under Maury's department, he has a large budget, about $13 million, but a lot of that is in general liability, comp, and a variety of other things. So we had the one-time money for wastewater utility work that's underway right now, so that one time would come out, and then we show some salary adjustments. That's everybody under Mike's group, no matter what position they would be based on their bargaining units or changes. That's what we increase there. And then there's some changes to workforce where they're going to charge a little bit of money to grants and down in Kevin Spiller's organization. There's some changes in transportation inspection where they would modify a position from one type to another. And then they do have a position in risk management, which I believe is currently vacant, as a senior admin officer that would now be filled in 2018. So those are all of the things that are directly under Mike's supervision. If you have any questions on that?
Mr. Chairman, this could be one for zero-based budget.
I think this could be.
Try it out there.
I figure if we
think
reduce the budget
2018
down.
program could be reduced radically.
I think we fund this till December 31st, and then the municipal manager can justify the budget.
Excellent idea.
Must be break time.
Mr. Peterson?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I see that we are eliminating a senior code enforcement position. It looks to me like anyway, and so I thought we were already behind on.
We are.
You know, code enforcement.
Just to be clear, this position is in the Transportation Inspection Office. This is not a land use code enforcement position.
Okay.
I
And
thought you
we're
were
converting-
supervising seniors.
We're, no. Yeah. We're converting a position from full-time to part-time in the TI office.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Okay. Lance, continue.
I'm getting goofy.
About to take a break, aren't we, Lance?
Yes, we are.
I think we're
We have-
ready for a break.
We have like 2 more slides here.
We're getting
wrapping
goofy.
up, maybe 3. Employee relations, their department has a reduction here. One of the changes is that in that transfer, you'll notice they actually have a person they're going to be reduced, that they're going to move finance and payroll. So when we get to payroll, you'll see one addition. It's just a transition. So ER looks like they're losing one position there. They do have 2 other positions. One of them is vacant, and I think actually both of them actually may be filled, but they will be funded for half a year. They're planning to retirement. So Aaron Norsworthy in employee relations is managing it that way.
Questions?
The next department is Mr. Falvey's department, which is Mr. Attorney. Bill's folks is primarily all salary issues here. One of the things that I would note is that when we calculated the cost adjustment increases for executive employees, we included everyone in the legal department, because all of their people are executive employees. We want to take a look at that, and I don't believe that was the mayor's intention. So we're going to talk to the mayor about that particular case. Bill does have 2 vacant positions that would not be filled in 2018 what's her name? Becky. We'll be working with 2018. So.
We have lots of questions for you, Lance.
Locking on. Let's take a break.
We're ready to start. We'll start the questions, and we'll take a break. Eric?
Yeah, so the chairman and I share an interest in either adding prosecutorial staff or a prosecutor on the worry that the increase in police is going to require that. I don't want to get cynic in trouble. Do we want to go through you on it, Mr. Falsey, both of you, to ask what would be a reasonable accommodation of what can be expected as an increase in at least patrol level crimes that'll come in with more officers actually out there looking for things?
Yeah. And let me add one thing into this.
Yeah.
We're told that right now they're taking the $50,000 cut in the prosecutor's department. Is that correct? Or is there no cut going on there?
So this is our prosecutor's office.
Yeah.
They're not taking it in the prosecutor's office, except to the extent that we have removed one of the secretarial positions. So, big picture, starting into this question, the totality of the municipal attorney's budget is mostly hard to manage in the sense that it is all labor, it's all salaries and benefits, plus money that we have already contracted to the Denali Law Group to provide representation to indigent defendants. So the amount of budget that we can actually squeeze is very low. When we were asked to propose these budget cuts, then we could really only do it by eliminating PCNs. We had some natural attrition and we just held those positions open. Our goal was to preserve the ability of the prosecutor's office and the municipal attorney's office to continue to manage all of our workflow. So we took those hits in a paralegal position, which actually moved to risk, and we're shuffling around upstairs on that, and the secretarial position downstairs. The way we manage the secretarial position downstairs is to actually close the office to the public on Friday, so we can still do the business of the office, but tell people if they need to visit us, it's gotta be Thursday or Monday. I don't think it's accurate to say there's a $50,000 cut to prosecution unless there's some arithmetic that someone's looked at these numbers and said, you can allocate something about our non-labor cut and something about our secretarial position. We are, of course, always open to ideas about how to increase funding to the office, but I would say it's a conversation worth setting aside some time to go through, because it may be that adding another prosecutor would not give you as much bang for buck as some other options. Like, for instance, increasing the salary of the prosecutors. That is because the union attorney prosecutors, on average, are paid in the $60,000 range. And we get constant churn, so we're always having folks in some training. So
And the state appreciates you training them, and then they come and take them.
And then folks go to private practice or they go over to the state. So we would want to think pretty critically about if there was an extra dollar, where the highest and best use of that dollar would go. It is also the case that the numbers of total prosecutions have been down over the past few years. I don't think that is a staff constraint. I think that is just noise in the data, but I'm happy to sit down with anybody who wants to sit down and bring Seneca into that conversation we can talk about.
Well, I don't think it's noise. I think it's a reduction in police officers directly leads to a reduction in cases. If you have fewer driving around, they see fewer people with their lights out who are drunk or whatever.
I'll get
But,
your friend.
so I've already had some complaints about that closure on Friday. People that need to get something criminal justice done on a Friday and have to wait a weekend, it can be either inconvenient or really, really important for them. So if we restore that legal secretary, is that Friday change? Would that effectuate opening back up the prosecutor's office to external communication on Fridays?
Yes, I think we restored that secretarial position.
I know, but I'm gonna get you an answer.
I'll say we didn't do it thoughtlessly. We actually monitored the number of people that were coming to the window for a couple weeks before we made the decision, and it was very few. And then when we advertised that people should come in on Thursday and Monday, most of the traffic moved. So
Okay.
I'm sure it inconveniences some folks, but when we were making the hard choices of how to take these hits, we thought keeping the cases in the prosecutor's hands trumps keeping the door open.
Bill, can you take a look at the prosecutor's office? Let me know what the Sunday could do to add more money and how much money we'd have to add in. Because ultimately, we're the body that sets the budget. And we can cut from other places and bring it into the prosecutor if we can prove to the Assembly members they need that money to do their job. Because as he said before, if we have more officers on the street, we have to prosecute more. And sometimes they don't prosecute because the state refuses to file on some of them. We've had a whole problem with that. And the state doesn't deal like domestic violence cases. It's our staff that does that. So I'd just like to know what we need to do. And I'm been told they have no legal assistance anymore. The attorneys, are they doing everything on their own, or do they have legal admin, or what?
We have only reduced one net legal admin position, so it's not the case that they're adrift without any actual help.
Okay. So let us know, okay? Even though you're not going to be city attorney anymore.
Well, that's
It's
been
gonna
taken
affect
up,
you.
or so things.
Okay, I've got.
Confirmation, Mr. Chairman, subject to confirmation.
We'll talk about that later. Felix, Forrest, and then Fred.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Eric took my question, so I'm good.
Okay. Forrest, sir?
Yeah, I think Bill already answered. Thank you.
Fred?
Yeah, so the property crimes epidemic that we're seeing has lots of fathers, but it's every step of the chain. So when we had a hearing in this room, I think it was our municipal prosecutor sat almost where I was, and sitting, and told me, as I understood it, somebody chose to go to court. These are all misdemeanors. It'd be 8.5 months. And at least I hear one shoplifter who had 11 arrests, never been to court yet, and so on and so forth. So, and then I think the delightful lady, that woman that's prosecutor, told me most of the cases get pled out, which I expect. But I'm very wary of doing anything that doesn't increase I think the load that our prosecutors should be having. Anything that decreases their capability of dealing with those and dealing with them rapidly. So I don't question Mr. Falls at all, but his idea or statement, I think, that the load on the prosecutors hasn't gone up is surprising to me. So there's obviously something I don't know, but I share the feelings presented here. We can't weaken that portion of the criminal justice system, and particularly now.
We've seen the state cut the prosecutors off from the state level. I don't want us to do it on this level.
Yep.
And be part of the problem out there.
Yep.
I've
Well
got
said.
Pete and then Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, just a speculative question, if SB 54 passes in the special session, is that going to create some new cases to where we might actually really need another prosecutor?
Mr. Chair, would that create new cases?
Or additional workload, or however you want to say it?
I will give a totally hedged answer, it may, and that's because thinking about some of the changes that SB 4 will create. One change may move a class of former misdemeanors that were turned into citations back into misdemeanors, which would put them back on the radar for downstairs. So I think the answer is yes, but I'd verify that with time.
Okay, thank you.
Good question.
Chris?
I'll just add one note to that there are 3 areas that we sent messaging to the state that they need to pick up the ball on the SB 91, SB 54 thing.
prosecutors.
Prosecutors, police, and treatment. And our budget needs to reflect those values as well, I think, because we're the brunt of those problems. We're the focal point of it. And so if we can carry that message forward, then I think we do our part even more.
And I will say, through the job, on that point, when we were designing the budget, that was top of mind for us too. So you see that the police forces continue to go to the level that we think it should really be at. Originally, the request from OMB was everybody proposes a 10% budget cut unless you're a public safety agency. We successfully lobbied to say the attorney's office should be part of that public safety formula. And the ultimate cut that we take is less than that 5% because we wanted to preserve the prosecutor. But when you squeeze the part of our budget that is squeezable, there's only so many non-labor dollars that you can get away. And then at that point, we say the assembly line upstairs in civil, cases get put on the assembly line and we have to deal with them. Downstairs in prosecution, APD puts stuff on the assembly line. We can choose whether to work on them or not. So that's the only part of our work that we can really control the amount that we're doing. So if we're really squeezed, then the prosecutor position gets cut. We do not want to do that, and that's what you see here.
Right, and
why we got a bit of a special treatment.
I think the argument that I'm hearing is that point right there between the police and the prosecutor's office seems to be the area that not only needs to be protected from being cut, but might be the area that needs to be increased, because if the police are sensing that they aren't getting prosecutions moving, they're no longer writing tickets because it's not worth it, that's the pinch point. And so we can do our part if we fix or figure out the hole there.
And I'll say we're very cognizant that I have not heard that has been a problem as between police and misdemeanor prosecution in the city. Of course, I've certainly heard that is a big concern as between police and felony prosecutions, particularly felony property thefts in the state.
Thank you.
Well, Lance, anything else before we take a break?
No, sir.
I got to tell everybody, I was looking at the Polo newspaper, and they've got a problem there. Is their legislature did the same thing ours did. You know, anything under $250,000 is a misdemeanor routine. Their state legislature made it $750,000. So guess what's disappearing in supermarkets over there? Spam. Because apparently the people found they can get spam and sell on the open market. They go right up to $749 and then don't take anymore because then it's a felony. So every issue has a problem.
They must be better at math than
Well, they got more time to live on the beach. We'll take a break. How long did you get the break for, Lance? 15? So when are we supposed to start?
We were supposed to start.
at 2:30,
Let's start at 2:45. 2:45, my friends.
10-minute break.
I couldn't believe that the spam is disappearing. They've had people walk out with those cases.
Eric tells me that Eric tells me he's receiving reports of roasts and meat being stolen from cars at Freddy and being sold to some restaurants.
That's possible.
It's a nightmare.
Anchorage, and there is
Assuming I'm not technologically challenged right now. Are you going to get that?
Looks like there's a lot of work going on this table. Look at all this paper.
We do.
Did you keep your part too? You did.
I did.
Follow the instructions in class.
No, I don't. I don't participate well.
Okay.
Did I tell you?
You're welcome. Absolutely. Yeah. Yep, that'll totally work. That's why we gave it to you.
That's just part 2.
Thank you.
Oh, no, we've already.
How much is part 2? How long?
It's shorter than that.
As long as you want it to be.
That's all right.
Lance, the reason we're going so long is because for many of our people, this is their first budget.
And if we invite the directors, I mean the chief, once you get started, police, and I knew police and fire would take 45 minutes. That's okay.
Thank you. Amy, are you disappearing? Amy? All right, I'll get her later.
You're supposed to take a nap during this break?
No, I'm supposed to use the urinal or something like that.
Huh?
Guess you're supposed to use an old men's room or something.
I did that. There we go. How you doing?
I'm fine. Where's your cookie?
Some crumbles.
I'll tell you about
Amy?
Where's Amy going?
I don't know. Amy, are you leaving us?
Next time you see him, say.
You're leaving us? That means I can get through faster. Thank you.
I gotta go to work.
I'll make real money.
But
You got to tell them all those liberals you're surrounded with. I understand.
I'm in hell. But
I know.
That's all right. Then I get to go to Chuniac. It's all better.
You take care, huh?
I'll listen to the audio, and I'm gonna have questions. So I'm gonna follow up directly with Lance and the department heads that have questions.
Take care. Be safe. Her son almost went off the bridge. That her son, that frost we had on the bridge, his truck hit both sides, almost went off the bridge. So,
Well,
Yeah, they have a whole lot of here, kind of going around the shirt, and that's where everybody.
I've got an old dog, one of them, well, both of them are old. Just kind of lame, ran outside, and there was frost on the cement deck, and he just
gone.
yeah fell down and slid across there. I felt so
I know how that works.
Shamed him.
Chris?
Yes.
Hi.
Oh. Go Bears.
You might need another one, you never know.
I'll be there tonight.
Oh, Eagles.
They start at 6 or 6:30?
6:30.
6:30.
Yeah.
Go Eagles, yes.
Go Bears.
Well, I hope they all play well. I hope everybody's safe, you know.
It shows West
Should be
wins.
fun. You know, who thought West would be here? Who thought Bartlett would be here?
West was there last year.
But they started the season very poor. Yeah, I think they were like, 3-1.
The Eagles are always there.
They beat Lathrop, but they had, they had Soldotna, Colony. They had a tough beginning of the season. I did not think they
Mine's in my pocket.
All right, good for them.
Yep, and my son is just really happy. I think
Bartlett ranked number 1. I thought Bartlett was
Bartlett
good.
was ranked number 1 at the beginning of the season, so they've both done a really big comeback. For both of them to be there.
So that's last year. Yeah, last year at least one. Good. Chewy and crunchy.
So Lance, I was cocky that earlier today I said we were gonna get done early. You're not gonna finish by 4 hours.
We have lots of questions.
Too much.
Then we're gonna go.
And Amy's gone now,
Too
so
much
that'll
BS.
reduce some of talk time down.
We'll have a leadership meeting.
Do you want me to put a timer?
I gotta go home and change. Put on some long underwear before that football game.
Da, 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 da.
I'm gonna go to a meeting on when you can shoot and when you can't in South Anchorage.
Yeah, I heard about that.
I'm gonna go to that meeting. I was asked.
You can shoot, they're in your house, you can shoot if they are threatening another human being or yourself.
Or you can shoot if they have a gun and you're worried about your life.
That's what I'm saying. If you're worried about your life or the life of someone else, you can shoot.
As long as it's reasonable.
I don't know, if you find them with a gun in their hand, obviously they meant to use it.
But you can't shoot them if they're driving off in a car.
Can't shoot them if they're running away.
If they have a broom. Sorry.
That was he was charging, he was a big dude, he was charging at those police officers. They didn't. It's not based on the weapon, it's based on a reasonable fear of serious, grievous bodily harm.
I know, it always helps if the person's found with a gun in their hand.
I think sex assault too. I think you can shoot somebody who's attempting to rape someone. I could be wrong about that. But I think they consider it a serious bodily harm.
Could be.
But it depends on
And that would be an oxymoron.
well, it depends on we define sexual assault to the point where a lot of things are sexual assault.
Hey, you're doing a good job.
If you grab it, okay?
Oh, patience. I'm sorry if we have too many questions. I've new seminary, and it's not.
It's like the
It's just the pace and what you guys want.
You saw
Oh, gosh, I was gonna say, and
All right.
This one will be easier.
I may have that email chain over. Specifically for that. Right.
We certainly have a lot on our desk.
Yep, we're making you guys go to work. That's what happens in this country, right?
It's It's where you earn your 12 cents an hour. It's
Wait,
here.
we're gonna cut all that discussion off. So what my office
How you doing, Mr. Homeless Chairman?
It's doing well. It's every day. Every day we talk about it.
It used to be we raised our children and taught them to find their own way in life and get through our parts.
Dick,
And
I heard you
now-
talk about that at various community councils.
As a kid growing up, I never expected society to house me. If I didn't have my own place to live,
Wait a minute.
good heavens.
It's a bit simplistic.
No reality.
Yeah, but you could also raise a family with one salary.
You could, I did.
I know you did. And you had like a pension.
I
and
had
you
three
could
jobs,
afford to buy
but I
a
did
cow.
it.
You can afford to buy a house.
I had 3 jobs, but I did it. My kids don't wonder now, how'd you do that? We can't. Different times.
Yeah, you try to work 3 jobs now, you get fired from 2 of them.
Yeah, I know.
So we can they haven't allocated that 500,000.
Right. They have a idea of budget.
Not enough.
Well, of course not, no, but they're specific.
Let me rephrase it. It's not enough for us this year. We need to do more. It just has to be done smartly.
I know, but look, there's a finite amount of money.
I agree, but less than 1% of our budget being spent on the 1% of our budget being spent on the number one pervasive problem.
That's not true. You know what? You've talked about this because a big part of our fire budget is
No,
our
I
police
get that.
budget.
In terms of coming
and
up with
our-
solutions that actually reduce those other costs is my point. My point is coming up with a system that actually reduces that problem.
Ask the public what they think.
It's rare, but I agree with you.
I'm not wrong. I'm not wrong.
I agree with you, but it's a.
Felix, ask the public what they think.
Okay, you guys tell me what we're going to cut then.
Kick them out of our camps and make our neighborhoods.
Just open up the landfill and fill it up.
The public is wrong. That's a good question.
But they're those ones who put you in office.
I know. And they're the ones that can take
They're
care.
already
They don't like that.
whatever dollars in prosecutors or whatever. Like, where do we get that? We spend it out of fund balance. I mean, we do have
Take
some
out the
fund
friggin'
balance.
library.
Do we?
I'm going to.
What? Do we really have money? I looked at it. It didn't look like we had any.
We always have some.
We have money we can move. You don't have none.
No, we do have fund balance. I thought we do have fund balance.
The administration does money.
Yeah, that's
different.
That's the
I can ask Lance
different.
how much
Okay,
you
that's true.
got. I can ask
We should
Lance
ask
how much you got.
Yeah, we should ask them because we are making amendments.
Because I would, if you want to add $250,000 to the prosecutor's office to respond to staffing issues or whatever, that might be a good place to do it.
Well, should we get started? Where's Lance?
I will tell you.
Your office. And they're mad when they did that.
So they said they fixed it.
We ready?
So I'm seriously contemplating an amendment to the cops thing, the settlement to the fire fund, putting an amendment forward that says our funding is contingent upon their board agreeing that to us. These liquidation until this debt is paid. And then they can choose to take the money or not.
But the debt should be paid off.
Are we supposed to start at
You
2:30,
should
Mr.
not give them a
Chairman?
chance to liquidate our.
No, and then us have to pay more.
Right. You know,
We've got to pay to make it whole.
freaks me out.
I know.
All right, back to the salt mines, here we go.
Where's Lance?
He's just in the bathroom. We'll be back in a second.
That's not allowed.
Is he on a break or what?
Rose did. Just, what kind of butter did she use is the question.
Where's the recycling?
Special butter.
Let's close the work session. Back door. Lance is in the room. Lance, question before we begin. How much is in fund balance?
So,
I know the administration is not planning on spending, but I want to know how much money we're talking about.
depending on how the year ends, it's going to be, I think I'm going to estimate it's probably around $3 million.
$1 million? That answers your question.
That's the size of our bonus?
So our next question, the assembly budget. Zero will be last, so I can take that by the time we get there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or two.
Thank you, Mr.
Didn't know we
Chairman.
had a
So
budget.
The second, this is the second half of, so the format's basically the same. We're gonna start with Chris Schutte and the Department of Economic and Community Development. Then we'll work through Chris's departments. The format's basically gonna be the same.
Feel free to
And,
readdress it, just know.
the chairman requested we have two department heads here, and then we've heard some concern or some questions from another assembly member. So we invited John Rada, Mary Jo, and Jack Ross to join us. So, and Liz. Okay.
Welcome to the meeting.
All right, so let's go ahead and start with Chris's group. Everyone have a copy of, I passed out, it's the same format, it should say continue, part 2, the dark letters under there, so you know you're looking at the right one. Okay. So we work with Chris's group. So, under Economic and Community Development, Chris, again, similar to Maury's group and to Mike's group, Chris has a significant amount of money that's recognized in his budget, while only about $1 million of that, roughly 10%, is for salaries in the 6 positions, and then roughly another maybe 3% as it relates to some contract work. The balance of that is basically money to support the Sullivan, the museum, and other public facilities. So that's the majority of what's in Chris's budget. He does have one adjustment that he made in 2017 that continues on into 18, and that is an addition of a GIS person. Some contractual adjustments inside the Performing Arts Center that were made in 17 that will transfer to 18. I know that the Assembly has addressed and struggled with, as I believe Chris has, well, as to the performance of the Sullivan Arena. There is an anticipation that we will still face that challenge in 2018, so we're putting in a budget for a one-time bid of about $243,000 to address that anticipated operating loss at the Sullivan, and then some reductions in the GIS data services to help meet budgeted staffing in 2018, no difference from 17. So
We have lots of questions.
okay.
Forrest, you're first, then Fred, then Felix.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So
You're next.
your
You're not there.
intergovernmental
You're 10.
charges
It's 8.
on page 5 of the packet are down 41%, and I'm just curious why that is.
Page 5 of the book or the package book?
So on ECD 5, it was 858,000 in 2016, went up to $1 million in 2017, and is now down to 637,000. And I'm just sort of curious what those charges are that flow through your department and why they're down so significantly.
So I will help Chris get back to that intergovernmental charges. I will find out from Aaron, we'll look at that on Monday for sure.
Fred?
I see the, thank you, the hotel tax is down, is that just population going through them?
So the hotel tax is a combination of two things. While the number of visitors is not going down, the price per room is going down, so thus the revenue generated.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, sir. Felix?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So regarding the Sullivan Arena continued operating losses, I heard Mr. Wilbur talk about it being a one-time. Do we really expect it to be one time? Do we really expect the contract to start operating and stop losing money on that? Or is this a new paradigm in our budget?
So, Assemblymember Rivera, first of all, the big difference in this budget for OECD versus last year is that we're anticipating the loss. Last year, as you probably remember, we had to work through a fund balance-based solution, which is not an ideal place to be. However, once we got through that, in working with the operator, which they've made significant changes at that facility, they've laid off a number of people, they brought in a new director, and the ship is turning. Even under the best of scenarios, it's not realistic to anticipate going from a $589,000 loss in 1 year to making money the next year.
Yeah.
So what we have done is we have, in working closely with the operator,
We've projected a trajectory of getting back to there, but if I were to give you my best guess today, I would say it's going to be a 2 to 3 year, at a minimum, turnaround.
Thank you.
Tim?
On that point, did we get the turf? Is the turf available? Has anybody used it, or is the dome just going to take over everything?
Well, the dome is still under inflation, yes, you can call it. And the turf was ordered, and it should arrive late November, if I'm not mistaken.
Third week of November.
And installation of that is no big deal. You just slap it down there, right?
Well, it's a big deal if there's ice in it, you just have to work around it. If the ice is out. The plan at this point, sorry if I wasn't here from the beginning, it sounds like Sullivan, I mean, it's a sneak contribution.
Chime in at the right time.
Right time, John.
Been working with Greg Spears and Greg Strauss and others. And with ice being in, it's the dominant revenue generator.
Sure.
Between now and March. I think they're going to try to capitalize on making ice available beyond just UAA or other user groups.
Sure.
Try and sell some of that off. The cost of doing a conversion to get revenue generated, putting down the turf as opposed to back and forth really isn't that cost effective. And so I think the goal right now is our target is mid-March. Ice will go out and we will completely cover the Sullivan Arena floor, about 29, almost 30,000 of the artificial turf panels. And well in advance that will have been marketed and then sold off to the user groups for continuation all the way up until whatever transition to outdoor facilities.
So the first time you put it down, you cut a fit, and then when you pick it up in order and lay it down if you have to put it up and take it down.
The only cuts you have to make are if you should have a radius or if you have a short corner or something like that. Those are all typically labeled, set aside. The balance of these pieces are 3 feet by 5 feet. They lay in interlocking similar to Lego connections.
Yep.
And you slap them down. As fast as you can take them off the pallet and lay them down, you start with the square line off center, and then you just start working from there with offsets. The only cuts will be
on the edges are.
Yep.
Yeah, so it makes sense, and you probably won't use it for the winter time just because ice is, like you said, ice is a bigger revenue generator, and hopefully you will have the business that you need at some.
It appears, and Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Greg is taking a different approach than previous.
Yeah, that's correct. So as I mentioned earlier, we've been working pretty closely with SMG and the local GM who has run the Egan Denina Convention Center complex for, I think, a decade. And has a unique skill set, has taken on the Sullivan as his own pet project, so they were able to reduce costs by removing several positions at Sullivan directly and reallocating that responsibility to existing staff. And Greg has an impeccable record at the convention centers and has done a great job so far in the first 2 months or 3 months he's been there in helping to reorient that operation towards profitability.
So their marketing leads you to believe that they're going to make some money. Good.
John?
Okay.
Any other questions from assembly members?
Is this just bringing in GIS in-house? Is that what you're doing? You're reducing labor or professional services and adding?
No, so member Croft, that particular line item is just a reduction in the amount of professional services for GIS-based professional services that we procured.
And then you've got an addition of 1 GIS technician.
That is correct. That was a staff position added in mid-2017, if I recall correctly.
Okay, but it's not really in-housing that stuff you were doing before?
It's a combination. So there are GIS analysts inside the GDIC, as we call it, but there are also significant professional services that are still contracted with that are external to municipality. We have reduced a portion of that contract by $80,000.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions from assembly members? Thank you. Appreciate you being here. Lance, continue.
So the next department is Development Services. This is Jack Frost Group. So basically in Jack's organization, it's pretty much a same budget from 2017 to 2018. We have one position that is being proposed to be eliminated. It's a full-time engineering tech 3 position. It's currently vacant based on the records that we have when we built the budget. And similarly to some of the other one-time monies, the administration is proposing that we add in $200,000 to address some of the significant and most egregious code abatement and deteriorated property cleanups. So this list of those properties would be determined and then provided to the assembly. But right now, I don't have a list of what they might be. But I think Government Services will do a lot with a little bit of money.
Question from Assembly members. Eric?
What are you going to do with that little bit of money? We use you a lot, as you know, and appreciate it. Or you just, I mean, I guess I'm worried we dock you 110, add 200 back. Are you just adding that position back, or you're going to figure out something else to do with it?
Mr. Frost, do you want to take a stab at that?
I do. Thank you. What we hope to do is actually use the money for property cleanup. We had a similar program back in the late 90s that was funded by the federal government, community development block grants. And essentially what you have to do is obtain a legal order from the hearing officer or court to be able to remove junk or whatever items from property. And then we use that money for cleanup. But there are several, it's going to take some study to see just, are we going to just remove public safety type issues that are hazard to health and safety. We also want to look at somehow to be able to replenish the funds, and we go after the fines, be able to maybe, I don't want to say seize property and make it look like we're trying to do that, but some collect fines to replenish the funds. I mean, it's a big piece, and we're really confident we can do something. But we're going to do some good.
Appreciate your help, Jack, and that sounds interesting. I look forward to that.
Question from Assembly colleagues for Jack? Forrest?
Just very quickly, so in your equipment and furnishing budget, you it looks like last year was an aberration. You went from 84,000 down to 14,000, now you're going back up to 84,000. So I guess I'm curious what happened last year and what kind of equipment and furnishing you plan to buy with the restored budget this year.
What Jack knows that number off the top of his head. We'll get back to you on that number.
Neil? Jack, do you have enough manpower now to do your job? I know we added one last year. You need more. Every department does.
We're adequately staffed.
You're doing what, sir?
So we're adequately staffed.
Okay. Any problem with the marijuana industry? You guys are working all right, checking to make sure they meet the requirements?
It's now matured, so they're a lot like any other business. Our continuing inspections, we're running into a few violations, but we thought we probably would. We pretty much predict which one they were going to be, and but overall, the program's going well.
When you run into violations and they're confirmed violations, would you let Mr. Wilton's committee know about that?
Yes.
Because as they come in front of us, it would be nice to know, and so we can kind of predict which ones they are. We'd appreciate that. Chris?
The converse to that is about the illegally operating cannabis operations, and if we have any plans that we're working on to perform any actions with those folks and the landowners there that are allowing these illegal operations to move forward.
Currently, no.
Okay. Yes, Pete.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So when you inform these cannabis business owners that they're in violation, do they typically make corrections immediately, or does that vary from business to business, or how's that going?
Most of them make corrections immediately. We have a couple that we're issuing notices of violation to, and there's one in particular with fact we're issuing another one today.
All right, thank you.
Did I get that? Yes, where?
I don't want to get...
Whose area is that in?
It's the one that's on the border.
We know whose area it's in, don't we, Tim?
Yeah, I guess. It seems to me I argued that point at one time.
Okay. Thank you, Jack, for being here. We appreciate all your work. We really do. I mean, everybody wants an area cleaned up. We call on you, and we appreciate your activities. Let us know how we can help you. Thank you, Lance.
Okay, the next department is the library, Mary Jo and her organization. So Mary Jo's department in 2017, they had some adjustments in their fleet and a small fleet, one or two vehicles were released, so there were some adjustments there. Salaries and benefits, including some position changes from part-time, and then made some labor adjustments. So the balance of that is the $556,000 that we rolled into 2018. There's a proposal to reduce some one-time material purchase reductions for the library in 2018. They have 6 positions that would be affected. 2 of them, as you'll see there, they work about 4 hours a week. Those are the first 2 part-times, and then they have a couple of full-time positions, and then 2 more part-time positions that work more than 4 hours a week. But all of these, as I understand it, all of these positions are currently filled and active. And then there are some changes in order to, for Mary Jo and the library to meet their requested reduction. She's made some proposals to reduce professional services and then some overtime. But on the other hand, she's also asked for an increase in her janitorial and security for the LUSAC. And we're recommending that you support that. And part of that will be covered from the savings from the position she's proposing, as well as now that the library is going to be completed, she'll be able to receive some revenue from lease and rentals from the spaces that she has inside the library. So that's basically what's the changes between 17 and 18 for the library system.
Okay. Suzanne?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Concerning the materials purchase reduction for the one-time materials, what does that include? And a question from the community is, could that be offset with fundraising or donations?
Yeah, Mary Jo, you want to talk about the relationship between the library and the foundation?
Yeah, we have a Friends and Foundation, and they already give us money. You know, the Friends of the Library book sale brings in money as well as programming money, and the foundation does bring in some money. The $75,000 there, you know, if we write grants, we could conceivably, put money in that direction.
You want to ask about Girdwood's library?
No, I think we're.
You're okay?
Okay.
So you keep getting asked by Girdwood.
Both books are still.
There's no plan to shut the Girdwood Library down.
Yeah.
Felix?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, you're right. There is no plans to shutter the Girdwood Library, but it does look like the LUSAC Library is taking a lot of hits. Could you, Mary Jo, just talk about how those hits, particularly what's concerning to me is the hours in reduction from 64 hours to 46 hours, how that's going to affect the clients that use the library? And then also I'm curious how that's going to affect, since there's more promotion for the library rental spaces, is that going to tie into reduction in revenue for those spaces since there's less time to use them?
One of the, when we compiled this, we thought we would have to cut 46 hours. It was a much deeper cut than what we ended up with. So even with that, though, we will be reducing our hours by 10 hours per week at LUSAC, and only LUSAC would be impacted. From an angle of rental, it could have, because of the way we designed LUSAC, people can get in the library, rent space, and not be open. However, it will have a big impact on the kinds of programs we can offer because we will be closing earlier. So, does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. I have one follow-up.
Go ahead, Bill.
And my colleagues might not like the question, but is there a reason why LUSAC was the only one that had the cuts?
Well, we're under-branched as it is. And we examined Girdwood because it was the most costly library, but, to close down existing branches or to reduce branches when we actually raised their hours, 10 hours per week, without costing the city any additional money,
So to go back and reduce already bad hours, they're only 39 hours a week, didn't seem fair to those communities. That's why we went to LUSAC.
Thank you. Tim?
You could always close down the assembly hours after hours and save a little money. Anyway, you have a great facility. Hopefully, use is up with the new facility. I don't know if it is or not, but it's looking good.
The use is, we took a real hit for 2 years to have, it was fatigue for our customers, and we didn't have meeting rooms to release. So meeting rooms will not only increase the revenue, but increase the use.
How about the school district? Do they use the facility?
They do, they come in, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
They come in and do tours, but this year and last year, what we did, we worked out a deal with ASD where 34,000 kids got cards last year. This year, it's been 40,000. So, you know, they can use the electronic resources.
It's a great resource. What's a community without a library?
Mary Jo, a question for you related to homeless. I'm told that the homeless live at the library, but some people that go there, they're distracted from going because of all the homeless. Are you doing anything about that, or is there anything we can do to get the homeless moved out of there? I mean, it's not a Second Beans Cafe, but from what I'm told by some of my constituents, that's a real problem.
Let me get started for you, Mary. So, Mr. Chairman, one of the line items, actually two of the line items in the budget below, you'll see are directly designed to address some of those concerns of balancing what is a public space, a publicly available space, and the population that visits that space. I think that the addition of the 83 and janitorial and security services is really going to be essential to ensuring that our brand new facility, which still smells brand new, smells that way for a little while longer, and is a great way to address some of those concerns. Additionally, LUSAC was the, like they call it, the recipient of a social work, embedded social work graduate student from the University of Alaska last year. And it was a tremendously successful program, much like you're hearing about with the CAP team at APD, that puts a frontline worker, if you will, in the environment where a lot of times people are coming in out of the elements to warm up, use the facilities, hopefully read books too. And so we look forward to continuing partnerships like that to better address some of those concerns and problems that you hear about and that we hear about too.
Okay. So this will help our security forces there by increasing this?
But one of the things you can't tell is who is homeless.
That's right.
We have regulars that come in every day that are as clean and neat as you are. We also have people who are inebriates. So I think to, you know, and we allow everybody in.
Okay.
If people are misbehaving on our inebriates, we ask them to, and trespass them.
Okay. Other questions from assembly members? Thank you.
So the next slide is library capital program. So one of the things that's going to help address the conversation we just had is a proposal to add $500,000 in bonds. And basically this would install cameras and a security surveillance system inside the library that would help all of the things that Joe was just mentioning. Any issues they have with theft or vandalism or the facility or trespass issues, as Mary Jo mentioned. That would be a project that would be implemented next year. And then out of Chudiak, they want to install an automatic handling system out in Chudiak libraries. So that's the summation of the capital for 2018.
Questions from assembly members? Yes, John.
I recommend you blend that capital improvement for the LUSAC into another very large bond, or it will fail.
So the LUSAC, the surveillance one would probably be inside an area-wide bond. So it'll be an area. This will be a project. It's a library project, but it would probably be exactly right. It's an area-wide service. It would be blended in with probably the warn, the ambulances, the transit. Those are all area-wide. That's basically how an area-wide bond package could be put together. excellent observation.
Good idea. He'll
Anything
do
else,
that.
John?
No, yeah.
Thank you, Lance.
Next department is Parks and Recreation. Parks and Recreation and their operating budget. So the difference is a slight adjustment, but most of it has to do with basically changes in the services that they have. In personnel, Parks and Recreation's not recommending any changes inside the positions. They do have some additional revenues that'll come in as part of previous bonds that passed for O&M to take care of those facilities that were approved and built and now that are in maintenance. But there's a blend of reductions in operating supplies, grants to some other organizations, and just little things here and there where John and his crew have done a great job to try to meet a target for them that was difficult in the first place. So, but that's what's going on at Parks and Recreation for services.
Fred Dyson, sir.
Yeah. I have an editorial comment, but I think I told you when I met with Bill Pop, AEDC, what can our community do to help economic development. One of the things that it's three things. It's got to be housing available. It's got to be qualified employees to fill positions. And then it's quality of life. And he said for today's professionals and the quality of life for community is important if they're going to move. And Parks and Rec is a huge part of that. And it happens to be an area where lots of things can be done by volunteers. And John is very keen about that. This Beach Lake ski trail, when I was sitting here 30 years ago, I thought we need lights out there. So lo and behold, I got one of my few good ideas that ever worked. The railroad gave us the poles. The IBW volunteered to do all the labor. A couple electrical contractors had the wire. We put the whole darn thing in the first, 2.8 miles or something. With volunteers for no cost. But there's lots of people out there that want to do good things and so on and so forth, but it takes somebody to ramrod it and to work that very actively. And I believe that some investment in the people that have the skills to rally the volunteers and make it happen, we can leverage that tremendously. So there's a grand idea, and it's going to be a tough sell in this environment, but probably if we're looking past just an annual budget, it's the kind of thing that will pay us good dividends in the out years. Remember, I'm the guy that could never see that kind of stuff. I tended to resist all the Project 80s. I called the Tony Knowles Trail the taxpayers' trail of tears. And all of those things are crown jewels of our community. And so we need to look at those kind of things and be smart about it.
I know Felix has been doing a great job working with Parks and Rec to, for example, have the canopy raised, University Lake area. I think Felix is also working with solid waste to have a dump off from Rogers Park there at no cost. So I appreciate your effort because there's a lot of people that want to do this stuff. We just give them the opportunity. Yes, Forrest.
So I want to start by saying I want to associate myself with all of Mr. Dyson's remarks. I agree. Just a couple of really quick questions for you, I guess for you, Mr. Rada. So on page 7 of the booklet, you have a $31,000 reduction in utility services to greenhouse and eliminate beautification support. I assume that's the Selcraig greenhouse in my district, and I'm curious what does that mean exactly? What are we doing?
We change our growing operation. We had to shut down 3 of the greenhouses to save us some costs there, and be looking at different varieties, if you will, of what is grown as opposed to annuals versus perennials.
You can do that.
Switch up and some of the garden plots and things like that.
Have you any pushback from the community or from the gardening community doing that?
No, it's just
experts are growing it.
It'll be, you really won't see a difference. You'll see things planted. You'll just see different varieties planted in rather than having to move them every year, there will be some that are, again, change from perennials to annuals or vice versa, whatever. So you're not gonna see blank spots, I guess is what I'm saying. It's just we're gonna be a little more efficient with our grow operation and reduce the costs.
Thank you. I like that you refer to it as a good operation. So our another question here on
Might wanna
pass.
put it out for a-
There's a 200% increase in contractual and other services. That's mostly because it's a relatively small number. You're going from 99,000 to 288,000. Can you explain what that is? Is there one particular contract that's increasing in size? It's on page 8 of the book that we've got.
We'll get back to you on that, Mr. Dunbar. We have to dig into the details of that particular number.
Okay. Last question, if I may, Mr. Chairman. Short
Go ahead, sir.
On page 15, you have an increase of 6 recreational specialists, 2. Can you explain that? It looks like we increased that number by 2 last year. Now we're jumping it up by 6. What project are they working on?
If you recall, this summer we initiated the Park Ambassador Program.
Okay.
So that's what that's for.
All 6 of those are park ambassadors. Thank you.
You done, sir?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Eric, sir?
So there's a reduction of 30,000 in ice maintenance. Have a lot of constituents that do that. Is that schools or is that for the lagoon, or where's the ice that we're not going
It's
to be
not
maintaining?
that the ice will not be maintained, it's going to be that we will absorb those duties in-house as opposed to paying contractor services.
You have the staff to absorb it?
It's just something that we have to make an elective decision to do to achieve the efficiencies that are required to meet our target.
It does seem like from this, you were given a goal. I know that the mayor said they gave various percentage goals to the various departments, and it seems like you're trying to find ways to meet those goals with the least impact. You were just trying to find pieces that you could do to
We're
say
not going to eliminate the service. I guess that's the first thing. We'll focus ice maintenance on those areas that are more specialized, that our contractor has done. And then we will take the more common, if you will, locations and use those with the people who do the ice services as we go.
It's likely to have some impact on timeliness and how quickly you get to them, right?
So you might have a loss for a portion of a day or something like that. We'll just create our circuit and follow it. It's something they're used to doing. We're just going to expand in a couple of other locations.
Thanks.
Okay. Felix?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So 2 things. First, I think Mr. Dyson is absolutely correct. Dick and I in our community councils, we talk to a lot of folks who are interested in volunteering a lot of their time working on the trails, working in our parks. And special thanks to the Parks Foundation for, I believe they're the ones that provide the funding for a volunteer coordinator in the Parks Department. I think we could take better advantage of that and really probably save a lot of money with people who are interested in volunteering. A constituent did have a question, and this switching every department talking about homelessness, switching to homelessness, and I'm just going to pass it on, and if either you, Mr. Rada, or maybe Ms. Burke has the answer for me. Constituent was wondering whether it would be appropriate or able for military personnel to help out with cleanup. So that's the question I said I would pass on. Speaking of cleanup, I asked a question of Mr. Rada regarding the current levels of funding for cleanup. I know that's something my colleagues have been interested in. So the answer he gave back to me was about $200,000 encompassing vehicles, fuel, landfill charges, personnel on an annual basis for cleanup. And I also asked, what do we need to do if we want to be more effective with cleanup? Now, Mr. Rada, the number you gave back to me was sort of doubling our crew, which would have an increased cost of $160,000. So the cost for cleanup would go from $200,000 to $360,000. Would that doubling up of the crew, you think, be enough to handle the load that Parks and Rec is currently dealing with for cleanup?
I think we could effectively do substantially more if, and it's not in the budget. These are all new things that have come forward. I haven't even talked to Chris about this, but we internally have been trying to take a broader view and tact and address 2 or 3 things that have already been said here, including the volunteers and managing that in a different way. Actually, to correct you, we actually fund the volunteer coordinator. That's through our office. If I had a magic wand, we hear a lot from the community about problems. Chris, this morning in the voice message you left me, Jewel Lake Park. We have 7 or 8 parks that are typically problematic year-round. Doesn't make any difference. It's not a seasonal thing. It's an ongoing thing. Park ambassadors did us a great service because they went out and they locked these parks up at night, and then park maintenance opened them in the morning. Cut down a lot of the problems. Whether it's Flannery, Ishla, Jewel Lake, South Anchorage, we rely on these other groups now to help us by locking them up at night. That doesn't work necessarily very consistently. That's an element that could be blended in. The volunteers dominantly are weekend warriors. Okay, that's where you get the best bang for your buck. We don't have staff qualified at that administrative and directive level to manage very effective, successful volunteer efforts of the size that I think we need. If there was, I'll call it a park forum, assigned to 4 days over the weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Thursday, Friday, whatever the combination is, and we had that second workforce that we could split segments and continue our cleanup efforts into the fall and winter and spring, and strategically spread them out. We could also use those people for both clearing, vegetation, park cleanup, ambassador duties, working with volunteer groups, and leverage what we have to a greater return on investment by using the volunteers or working with scout programs or other ideas that have come before us. So it's not in your budget. I get it. It's just something, I haven't talked to Chris about it. We've been discussing this for the last 2 or 3 days internally. But the answer to your initial question was, if we doubled the workforce, would we make a difference? Absolutely. And hopefully that would be significant. Community work services is the time of year where the numbers start falling off. We don't see as many people coming through the doors in the winter. And they're ill prepared to go out into the weather conditions. So we have to deal with that. So our focal point for community work service effectiveness is really from about mid-April until about the end of September. And the numbers are shorter on the fringe. They still do a great job, but they do a lot of other services as well. So getting into what I'm hearing more and more about is how are we going to continue our efforts into the winter as other things come up? How are we going to deal with the DOT right-of-way issues? Because we're starting to absorb those as well. So it's not just on parklands or municipal lands. We're now broadening. So minus more resources, I said this the other day, we won't catch up.
Chris?
Thank you. Yeah, it's kind of a follow-up question to that, and I think it's really for you, Mr. Schutte. So now we've heard kind of the homeless services through Health and Social Services, which isn't you, and we've heard from Parks, and the cost for those mitigation efforts doesn't appear to be plugged into the budget anywhere that I've seen, but it's costing us, and we're doing it. And so it'd be really great if we could come up with a location or process that's ideal for streamlining funding services for mitigation efforts. You know, it could be in a number of different ways, but you know, it's de facto landing on Mr. Rada and the Parks Department, in some way stripping them of their ability to do their core mission.
Actually, it is in addition to the core mission. It was money that the Assembly added in 2016.
Right.
And so it does have a line item, and if I understood Mr. Rivera's question correctly, it was, what if we took that line item and we boosted it? What would the impact be from the Parks and Rec perspective? So but the essence of your question, which is all of the different municipal departments who, in some way or another, whether it's the library or Parks and Rec, are touched by homelessness and the effects of it, and are there ways that we can easily identify how those mitigation efforts or response efforts are funded? And I think the short answer is yes. And when you look at that number in totality, it's actually pretty substantial.
Right, and so just a quick follow-up, I don't see the number for those services continued in the budget.
I've got you on the list.
Right, and so it would be great to be able to see them somewhere so we know, and then we can push on that number up or down, up as needed.
Thank you. Suzanne?
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. What does the reduced utility services line cut for 60,000?
So the reduced utilities that we are paying at the municipally owned facilities like Kincaid and others, and by reducing the amount of money that Parks and Rec underwrites for use of utility service at those events, snowmaking is a good example of that. It's one way that we were able to achieve our target, our budget reduction target.
Anything else, Ben? Mr. Seal, sir?
Yeah, volunteer efforts. Some of the community councils are really active or want to be active. Turnigan is one of them. But specifically with regards to the new tract of land that you're acquiring out by Cleethrow along the coastal trail there. Is there any work going to be done on that? Is there anything necessary to be done on that?
Tract of land?
Oh, that part, that land that that Turnigan Community Council got added into parks as parkland.
So I'll interrupt, John, because I can see by your quizzical look you don't know what he's asking about.
Yeah.
You're referencing the land use plan update map, where an area within the Ted Stevens International Airport boundaries was identified as
Yes.
preserved open space, which we still have to work out, Mr. Croft. It's still a little incorrect. But anyway, that's not necessarily an area that will be assumed by Parks and Rec for maintenance.
Anything else, Tim?
Yeah, one other thing. Westchester Lagoon is zeroed out. What was in there was zeroed out and as a line item on the capital improvement budget.
Oh.
Westchester Capital, you mean the capital?
Yeah.
It's
So on slide 9, is this one you're looking at?
Yes.
Yes. That's a lot of money.
So the first couple projects are in Eagle River, and so those will be the Eagle River Park Service area. They'll support those. The next one's Campbell Creek Trail Rehab, which is an ongoing $750,000 where they do wayfinding and rehab the surface of the trail. And Coastal Trail Bridge Replacement, that's a construction project down at Westchester Lagoon at $950,000. Safety improvements, implementing Fairview Park improvements. Facility upgrades, there are a variety. You'll see there's one at Mulcahy, I think one at Fairview Rec Center, one at Selcraig, and there's just some minor improvements at all of those facilities. Basically a skateboard park at Taku Lake, and then a bike track, a dirt track out at South Park. Some advancements already, there's some work at Kislev University and Council.
I've
seen a zero.
Well, Westchester Lagoon doesn't have any figure next to it for some reason.
It's a line break. It's a line break course there.
Coastal Trail Bridge Replacement at South Westchester.
You all right? Okay.
I didn't see it
Yeah.
return to that.
Okay. We're down to, next we've got Pete and then Fred. Pete?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're on here, John.
I'm looking on page 14 of the budget book, and we've gone from 41 lifeguard ones to
Everybody
33. Are we reducing hours at the pools, or how are we getting by with fewer lifeguards?
Yeah, we are. We have reduced, and we are, part of the budget reductions, we're reducing some of the hours.
Okay. Just wondered, thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Dyson, sir.
Yeah, John, when Town Square Park got open in Eagle River, there was a brief, pretty intense increase in several kinds of crime. And kids in our area look desperately for a shopping mall to hang out in, and they could not find it when they went there. So it was drugs, mostly young people, and some chicken pox hanging out looking for kids to. Are there any other parks, and our problem is largely gone away, but are there any other parks where crimes like that, people crimes, are a problem?
We have a lot of parks that are frequented by bad actors. It's a common theme, you know, that parking lots, and, you know, it's those activities that we hear calls about. And it's one of the things why the park ambassadors made such a big difference this past summer, eliminating some of the bad actors and some of the hot spots.
Yeah, so the subliminal question is, if we helped you with more resources, do we demonstrate that it impacts public safety and a bit?
You know, like I said, if I had a magic wand, there's lots of things I'd like to be able to do, but I also understand that that's not the period we're in. The short answer would be yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Dyson, sir. John, you're next.
So just a couple things, if I can. One, to follow up on Fred and how great our parks is. On kind of a cool, not particularly nice day, but not rainy, went to the South Anchorage Sports Park, and that little playground was open. And I'll tell you, that was swarming with all kinds of people. And, you know, I thought it was a big birthday party or something. It was just different families there. It was just tremendous, brand new, and super popular. So it's really nice. There is a lot in here where you have $100,000 or more in increased charges from other departments. Do they know about that?
I haven't seen the budget bill.
The one that's online. Yeah.
Oh, you're red.
Which page are you looking at?
Well, there's a bunch. If you look, intergovernmental charges.
He just needs the page number.
That's on almost every one.
Page 8.
Look at page 6.
The anticipated increases due to changes that have been implemented, whether it be through payroll or staff or whatever it might be. So I have looked at all the IGCs specifically.
So they're charging you more for what they're doing for you. So one thing you said, electricity for snowmaking. So the ski club's going to pay. They weren't paying for electricity, and now they will.
We're capping it at $30,000 this year. That system originally was sold, for lack of a better term, to the municipality that would operate anywhere between $8,000 and $15,000 net cost per year. Last year was about $56,000. It's been going up each year, depending on weather conditions, climate needs, etc. We can't continue to pay, so we're going to be, and they know this, we're going to cap it, so be judicious about when you decide to make snow, and preserve that snow, and hopefully the weather gods are also going to help us. So we'll foot the bill up to 30, and then we'll stop the meter unless somebody wants to step up.
Okay, can I follow up?
John, go ahead.
We have really an amazing event coming up this year with National Ski Championships. So the best skiers in the country is trying to qualify for the Olympics. And I had heard that you're going to charge for things that they hadn't had to pay for before, and they don't have the money. Like, can you tell me about that? I don't see it in here specifically, but
It's not in there specifically. We're working with Joey and with NSAA on the event. We're not in a position where what used to be the norm is practically every group, every nonprofit had a reason why there should be a no-fee basis. We're not in that position sustain our own operations. So we're lessening our contributions as opposed to what would have been 7, 8 years ago normal. We don't have the capacity to just give everything away, especially based on what the demand for the event will be. And so we actually have an agreement with Nordic where they do pay a lesser amount because of our partnership arrangement. We have the Kincaid, and so the amount of money that would have cost anybody else is going to be substantially less. So there's maybe a little bit of a different impression might be given to you, but the overall free ride is not there.
Anything else, Sean?
No.
Thank you. Chris?
Yeah, thanks. This is going to sound kind of odd. Someone gave me a request just this week, 2 nights ago, about
They
this.
want something for free?
No. What they want is to change the name of a line item, and I don't know what the proper naming would be, but the skate park.
We're aware of this already. We'll take care of that.
Okay, thank you.
No, what is it?
Just they're concerned that just the phrase skate park might cause negative response in a subset of very active people in a community and scuttle a project that would otherwise be very good for the neighborhood. And so it's happened already before. It happened once at Sitka Park. We lost our skate park because one section of the neighborhood rose up in opposition, and so we got a rock instead. We got a rock.
We're very familiar with the challenged history of bond-funded outdoor skateboard recreation facilities. We'll take it into
Very nice.
consideration.
Thank you.
Felix?
Mr. Wilbur, I had a question on the Capitol, but you might answer it if you go through the Capitol presentation. So I'll save my question until you go through the Capitol presentation for Parks and Rec. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. We already went through it.
Forrest?
What's your question?
Okay, I thought you did it.
Too bad.
You didn't? Okay, sure.
I did.
I'll
go back through, yeah.
No, it's
You
okay.
went through it.
I'll ask my question. So, University Lake Park, I see there's $350,000 there on the bonds. What's that specifically for? Is that for? Yes.
You know, there's been a lot of planning efforts around University Lake, okay, and this implements.
Yes. University Area Community Council is going to be so happy.
The exception of eliminating the dog park. That'll die on the assembly floor. So I just want to tell you.
I
I'll
agree.
park the place with
With
people.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's it.
He hates dogs. Forrest?
Yeah,
So I just want to say, we have a skate park in Russian Jack, and it's very well attended, and people love it. This is a question I've asked you a couple times, John, but I want to bring it up again. Maybe I don't think I've actually talked to Josh Duran about it. One of our lakes, Cheney Lake Park, has a lot of problems, as Mr. Dyson was talking about, with people entering the parking lot at night, and some illicit activities. There's been gunfire, and so I get a lot of the neighbors are displeased, and they want us to install a gate. And I understand why it's challenging, but I would like
being here, sir.
a sense of what that would
Thanks for
cost if
being
we
here.
did it. How much would it cost to install a gate there?
It's all right.
It costs us around $6,000.
Is it? Okay. So, if I were to add $6,000 to this bond for a lake, for a gate of Cheney Lake, I mean, it seems you guys don't need any other kind of facility upgrades there to make that work.
Remember, there's this consequence that goes when you decide you're going to do it. So now we're back to the same thing as Fuel Lake Park, Traditional Park, and others. Gates are effective if you have the resources to control the openings and the closings. That's the challenge. And we don't have those resources.
Okay.
We can always open them, but we don't have people that are out on staff at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night to go around.
So add 80,000.
If we were to get volunteers from the neighborhood, are they allowed to do that?
I kind of spoke a little bit about that. It sounds wonderful. Effectively, it doesn't happen consistently, and then more problems occur.
Have we ever explored automatic gates?
No, we have not, because we don't have power in all locations. And they're fairly expensive to put in.
How about a prototype of Cheney Lake?
What?
How about a prototype of Cheney Lake?
See how it works.
What?
All right.
Quick follow-up, Chris.
Yeah, my experience in parks, just to reiterate what Mr. Rod has said, like I have a neighborhood plan that's being developed for Fairview Snow Fighters. It's kind of a crazy idea. And they're all volunteer, and I keep telling them, that's great, but put a 5-year arc on it and figure out a way to make it desirable for the city to take on as an operation, because the volunteers will disappear on you. It's only a matter of time. And so don't build your permanent plan based on a volunteer base. It will never survive. So.
That all the questions? Tim?
What's going to happen with the park at 19th and Spenard Road? Margaret Sullivan, or whatever it's called. It's been locked for a couple of years.
We finally came to an agreement. Because they were in the driver's seat on some of the funding. But they're committed now to take on the fund with our match contribution, the entire project. And that will happen next year.
So you're going to take out the invasive species, the trees that...
There'll be some removal, but primarily what will happen is the lighting, parking lot, walkway, boardwalk, continuation, which was going to be like just parsed, will all be done complete.
Now, will that be done in conjunction with whatever they're going to do at Arctic Boulevard in terms of the trail?
There'll be a connection.
The water, the overflow issue. They got to change that culvert out or whatever it is.
Right, there's some work that has to be done over there, but we'll be going from the west to the east. Along that, from 19
Any other questions?
Good. I'll start advertising that you're going to upgrade that. It's going to be fantastic.
They don't yank the money back from us again, it'll happen.
That sounds like a disclaimer.
So Lance, which one are we going to do next?
So what I'd like to do, Chris has a couple more departments, planning and real estate, and then we'll move on to the CFO. I know we're not going to get through all of them, so let's finish up with Chris. We'll do the CFO, and then let's do finance, purchasing, and we'll end with IT, and then we'll end our day, and we'll pick up the rest of them next week. Is that okay with you?
Fine.
All right, let's go ahead and finish up with Chris's group, starting with planning. Thank you, Liz. Thank you, John.
Thanks for being here.
Thanks.
So in the planning department, I'm going to get back to my notes. Yeah, with increasing staff. So in the planning department, similar to Mr. Falsey's situation, the planning department has little to work with outside their staff. So in order to meet their proposed target, they have 2 full-time planner positions. I believe they're in long-range planning. I believe they are both filled. And then 1 principal admin officer, and I believe that one is currently vacant. Chris can correct me if I'm wrong. And to offset some of those reductions while still meeting their target, they would then add some funds in for labor and consultants, or training and consultant support to meet their recommended target. And that's the situation with the planning department. And I know that, and not to speak for planning over Chris, but they thought about this. This was a hard thing for them to do, and they really wanted to make sure that they weren't affecting current planning, but the folks that were coming to the counter that are also working in development services. That's no degradation to the benefits of long-range planning. It's just what they had to propose to meet the recommended reduction.
So Lance, I'm told they took a 9.72% reduction.
That would be about right.
Okay. Questions from Assembly members? Any questions? Suzanne, ma'am?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So what is the impact then of cutting those positions? I mean, what can we expect to see in terms of service reductions?
So in evaluating the operation and how to minimize any noticeable impact, the cuts that are presented to you are what was recommended for 2 reasons. One, the single biggest product or project of the long-range group has recently completed. And they felt that given the anticipated decreased workload, that long-range cuts would be the less impactful choice out of the other side of that operation, which Lance alluded to, and that's called current planning. Current planning is the day-to-day operations of someone building a house, building parks, et cetera. So it actually has a customer base and generates fees for the department. Additionally, we had a full-time admin officer position that was vacant. It was a position we moved over into OECD that was still on the books of planning. So by eliminating that position, we're just getting rid of the vacancy. It was a two-person operation, the administrative functions over there. The individual who's left has done a stellar job of moving up to a higher position to run the admin function over there. The balance of that, as Lance mentioned, is to invest in the people in the department through some technical training opportunities, but also to leave some of that money set aside for projects that may come up that will require professional services.
Any other questions, ma'am? Any other questions from assembly members? Thank you, Lance. Pete, you have a question?
Thank you. So we're laying off a senior planner?
I'm sorry?
Were you going to be laying off a senior planner?
That's correct. Yeah, we've got two full-time positions, one senior and one junior position, both of which are filled currently.
Who takes the hit?
A senior planner.
I mean, do we know the person at this point?
No.
We don't deal with names.
Short-sighted.
Thanks.
Okay, Lance.
The
One
last
one.
department under Chris's management is real estate, and real estate, remember my notes here, but I think
You took a 2.15%
$600,000 of
decrease.
that $7 million is in labor, but basically 6.2 or 3 million of that is all in Robin for lease payments. We basically, the payment we pay on this building, any building that we lease, the permit center, any payments that are made are in real estate budget, so that's why that $8 million is there. Staffing wise, she's not seeing any changes. The only change would be the grant that we received from the Rasmussen Foundation. We're going to apply that grant to a position inside real estate, which will offset property taxes. So position count does not change in real estate at all. Pretty much no change.
Like I said, you took a 2.15% decrease for this area. According to my sheet, it's correct.
And it has to do, the decrease is because we were able to receive those grant funds to offset property taxes. So that's the change.
Okay.
It's not 6 people making over $1 million each.
No.
John, you wanted to go work there?
Yeah.
Any other questions from assembly members?
We're not that kind of real estate.
Thank you, Lance. Thanks,
So,
Chris.
I know Robert has been in and out a couple of times.
He's been in and
If I
out.
can get him in here, we'll do, because I think, honestly, Robert's group and the finance group and the purchasing department are going to be relatively quick, and then we can wrap up with IT. We've had a lot of discussions today about SAP, which.
And we're still going to discuss that when we get down to IT.
So let's, if you guys could see if Robert's going to come in, and then we'll. I appreciate your patience, both for Resolve for showing up a little early and for Robert and Jeff.
There you go.
The 2040 plan.
That's right here.
For the leadership.
Neighborhood plan implementation. Actual keeping projects in alignment with the neighborhood plan.
So
Plan review.
There are the addendum.
I know, not
Got
the
one I have.
I know. I know who it's from.
No,
And this
the
is
neighborhood plan.
from Forrest. Okay, it's just necessary.
No, but it's a management.
So,
Usually they just go until they fall apart.
Community councils over the long term. Otherwise, they just
Don't
fall
get too
apart.
hoarse screaming.
Well, the internal side. The community councils are the external side. I'm just saying.
It's not a long range plan, you can always tinker.
I don't know.
Short range operation.
Yeah, yes and no. Yeah. I think we need to maintain a strong planning department. Long range planning.
Lance, if he's not here, we go to
Implementation of
IT.
those long range plans includes.
You know, they all do their own little hawk out, which is really
let
cool
me-
too.
Right.
Sorry, you already let us go.
Let me.
Gentlemen, ladies, Lance.
Let me give I'll do
Our
Robert's
attention is about
groups
that.
until he gets here. And if you guys have questions that I'm not
We're
able to
getting the
answer for
ADD
other
line.
departments and all, that's all the joint
We got work to do.
His, and obviously the questions that we have for all we can look at. So let me start with the CFO. Robert's budget's very simple. He's only got a couple people in it. There's really no changes when, and I'm looking at slide 12. As part of his target reduction, he's basically going to reduce about $23,000 out of his professional services. I don't remember the total amount of the professional services. It's, I believe, a couple $100,000. So, and I think that was some recommend. That's the proposal he has there. And if you have questions about what the effect of that would be, definitely Robert can address those.
Questions from assembly members?
Robert's pretty simple.
Go ahead.
Okay. I'm going to skip over IT and we'll come back to that. So finance. Finance department is made up of, similar to Mike's group, the finance department is made up of the controller, it's made up of payroll, the appraiser, the treasurer, and public finance. All of those things are in. That's why the finance department is $14 million, because it's basically comprised of a variety of different services. So in 2017, the finance department, we put in 200, and I want to point out a couple of them. The public finance department had some of their resources, and they supported the print shop with some of that, because the print shop is in IT under Robert, so we supported that. The print shop is being made whole, so there's no need for that, so we reduced that one-time hit. They also had some contractual services to support backfills for the SAP development when they developed the CAFR, and we funded it two different ways. We received about $212,000 from public finance, and we also used $212,000 from taxpayer money. That backfill effort for SAP is no longer necessary, so we pulled it out. There's some one-time money in the fleet, so those dollar numbers do not do not carry forward. The changes between 17 and 18, they had some salary and benefits, plus some reductions due. They have 3 SAP positions that were built in the budget specifically to build SAP, so those were recommended to be removed. The next role is, remember I told you that ER was giving up the payroll position and it was moving? That's where it's moving. That's at 900,000, so there'll be 109,000. The balance of the changes are to meet, when we asked Robert to meet his target, he was able to meet it in any one of those divisions that he wanted to do. It could come from all from one or from another. So his proposal is he would basically reduce a little bit of travel money that he has. He has 1 controller position, and I believe, I can remember, I think the first one, to eliminate the 1 full-time administrative officer, that one is currently vacant. But the next one, the senior administrative accountant, that one is filled, or vice versa. And then he has a reduction of a junior accountant position in payroll, property appraisal. What we're going to do on property appraisal is, you'll see it when you see the IT budget. There's a project in there to start the CAMA, which is basically the software we use for property appraisal. We're going to move those resources to charge that staff into the capital project for CAMA. That project gets started. And then in public finance, they have some external manager fees, custodial fees that proposing to recommend on this budget right here. So as I mentioned, the public finance group made up of all of those divisions, and then but the position count among all of those folks in finance, there's no net loss. It's just moving folks around inside that among those individuals. So Robert, and I know that many of you have maybe met Tammy Clayton, new controller, she and the payroll people, and obviously Dan, who reports to you with me monthly, and Bryant Robbins are doing a great job, and Robert and his crew are doing, this is a reasonable effort, but again, similar to parks and other departments, this is tough choices that they're making, but this is where they are in public finance. So if you have any questions about the position?
Questions from assembly members? I said they took a 2.13% reduction, so we appreciate that. Any questions? Thank you. Go ahead, Lance.
So the next department,
Thank you very much.
By the way, you're
Nice job.
Like I don't even need to be here.
I'll stand by.
Your position is next.
We reduced your position.
So the next one is the
We're saving $2 million a year from what we pay you now.
The purchasing department. So the purchasing department, basically has 14 positions in order for them to meet their proposed target reduction. They will have this is a position that they have had filled. It's vacant. They've been holding off filling it. This is an office associate position inside the purchasing department, and that position is currently vacant. They've been holding off filling it, depending on how the budget turns out. So that's the CFO, finance, and purchasing, and then the last larger department that's under Robert's organization is the IT department. So I'm going to go back to slide 13, and I'll start with an overview of the IT operating department, and then we'll do capital. So let me start with this one. So the IT department, as you're aware,
Lance, before we start, one thing I want to know is how much of this increase is because of SAP? Because I'm looking at 28.04% increase. When everybody else is taking reduction, I want to know that was for SAP depreciation. So please go on.
I will do my best to answer your question. So we have a lot of one-time expenses inside the IT department in 2017, and those were being removed. There's a couple of them in there that had been adjusted. One of them is a depreciation for the SAP software and going live. So that was based on a timing and when we would go live in July. So that was a one-time hit based on the 2017. They have about $1.4 million that you were aware of, and that Alden mentioned. We are using part of those resources for the stabilization processes that we're going through right now. They had some other one-time resources they put in the department. Plus, they also had when we built the amended budget, we knew, or we projected that the go-live date would be not July 1, it would be October. So we adjusted the AMS contract to support them in 2017. Suffice it to say, there's a lot of one-time agreements inside that related to SAP. You add in the changes that they've made, or the changes that were required to make as part of labor agreements and salaries, and changes that Resolve has made to move some folks around inside his department that previously were SAP positions. We've modified those through some other changes, and now that they're not, has moved them to increase their salary, increase their position. So the net value of that is changes in existing programs at 136. So that gives him a continuation budget of almost $25 million. Then we look at all of the changes that we think we're gonna have to make, at least what we did when we built this 3 weeks ago. The Chronos clocks, we are able to start the depreciation of the Chronos clocks 1 year after we're basically stopped using them. So we're gonna start the depreciation basically 1 year from 3 weeks ago. We won't be using them, but we still have, it's an asset value we gotta depreciate. Then you can see, starting with, Zal has 4 positions in his budget. I think the first 2 are filled positions. The IT procurement specialist, and Zal can correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that one is vacant, and then the other 2 are filled. That's based on, he's got, of the 5 positions, 4 are filled and 1 is vacant right now. So those are the changes in the staffing. I mentioned the CAMA support. Basically, we have some resources that we'll be applying there. And then the last 3 items are the significant ones that are related to SAP. We'll have $3 million programmed for the AMS contract. That's a contract, for lack of a better term, it's sort of an on-call service. We have it now. We will continue that, and if we spend the $3 million, we have it available. It may be less, but that's our projection based on the needs that we thought 3 weeks ago. And then the next one is the $4.5 million. That is when we are repaying the loans for SAP in the recovery schedule based on the schedule that we have, which I believe is 15 years. There's an opportunity, and I've already talked to the CFO about this, when we when we put all that together as an opportunity in the future where we can actually refinance that for better terms. But right now, that's where we are, and I think that's a good place to be for the budget purposes. So basically, $4.5 million is for depreciation, $3 million is for technical support and contractual services, and then the rest of the reductions or changes as it relates to the staffing. The bottom line, the depreciation and amortization of assets purchased in previous appropriations, that $9 million, that's not specifically related to SAP. All of the depreciation of all our IT technology is inside IT. So when we appropriate their budget, we appropriate them $22 million. But the amount that's actually in the budget will include that 9 because the desktops, the laptops, the computers, whatever, copiers, whatever it is that we have, all of that depreciation schedule is inside Saul's budget. So that's why it's shown there. So, and as you heard this morning and yesterday, there's still a lot of work in the carryover or the sort of post-production process of SAP. So, and their capital budget's a lot easier.
Questions from assembly members? Tim?
Yeah, SAP. It seems to me that loan recovery at $4.5 million in 15 years, that's a rather large chunk of change, like $75 million or something.
$80 million.
So
Say
I
2.2.
believe it's, I'll check, but I think it's 10 years at 4.5. I'll find that here real quickly. I don't want to contradict my right now, in terms of the funds that we've spent of the $82 million of total SAP costs, we've already spent some money on that. I think our total outstanding loan, when all is said and done, probably by the end of the year, we'll be in close to the $40-some million range, 45-ish million. I'll give you that. But it's payment of this capital, this master tax lease that we have from KeyBank, extremely reasonable terms, and we've used that for this and for some other financial needs in this fund.
Quite frankly, I am concerned. SAP has been a nightmare and it's been tough going all the way along. I'm concerned that we're maybe a little optimistic or taking risks that we're not going to support it well enough to make sure that it works and works right. I mean, it's a fear factor in me, and so we'll be watching it as we go. But we spend a lot of money on this program. It's got to work, and you've got to support it and make it work.
Thank you. Felix?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Two things. So first, just to clarify and make sure I heard this right, the 2 full-time help desk positions currently filled, we're eliminating those 2 positions.
That's correct.
So I can, sort of from personal experience, understand the frustrations of waiting and waiting for someone at help desk to answer. So I'm just curious what those effects are going to be in the end. Is the average wait time for someone calling the help desk going to increase, and then how's that's going to impact sort of on the back end, everyone doing their job? They're spending more time waiting for a help desk. That's one question, and then I'll wait for the second one.
Okay. Zoll, would you like to discuss that?
Calm down.
So, Mr. Felix, first, one position is vacant right now.
Okay.
The second position is likely to become vacant this year through retirement, but that's not necessarily part of the conversation. It is filled today. We are in the process of sourcing Tier 1 help desk services right now. The contract is in flight. Vendor is selected, it's a local vendor. And we are expecting to be able to provide much better services than anything we've seen in the last decade through a set of contracted services, specialists in terms of Tier 1 and Tier 0 help desk provision. It'll allow the municipality to have
a slightly larger range of service hours. We will be not limited to one or two resources, being significantly hampered when they're on vacation. And we will have a set of service levels with a competent entity that's local. So the merit of it is, yes, we were expecting to use some of these dollars from these resources to fund it. That doesn't change that question, but in terms of service performance, I definitely expect this to be a much better service answer than what we've got.
Great. Fantastic. I like that. So next is, again, SAP. And so for my colleagues, I'm looking at IT page 13, SAP services. What I'm trying to understand here is what the new norm is going to look like in terms of switching. I understand in the stabilization phase what the operational cost, the new norm of that is. So if someone could sort of walk me through, is this going to be sort of a normal budget, 3.6 million from here on out for SAP? And those 5 positions?
IT 1-3.
Yeah. Yeah, 13. Yeah.
So new normal for SAP.
Yeah.
I think maybe I can try that as all. Please step in if I miss anything. But there would be 2 ways to think about the service that we get in order to support SAP. One is we either have resources in-house or we have managed contracts from AMS and so forth. Where exactly we're going to land in order to be able to have the right amount of service we need, to be able to have the right service response times we need, is something that IT department and we'll be looking at over the course of the coming months to determine what's going to be the best solution for some cities. Just assign it all over to somebody else. It's all managed. Others have looked at their own particular needs and have said we need to have some resources in-house. Because when you pick up the phone, you want to have somebody who understands that our municipality or our unit, that's different than some other city or some other resource. So we're going to be looking to make sure we have a clear understanding of that so that we can support SAP going ahead.
Okay. Thank you.
Pete?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so I was also going to talk about the help desk positions because I feel I was probably keeping one of those people busy myself. So we are having a few problems with implementation of SAP, and so the help desk, that's not where someone who has SAP problems would call right now? Right. It is where they would call. It is not. All right. So typically the help desk is just for people like myself who just don't understand computers very well.
So, it's a lot more context. SAP is a big problem in the municipality, I get that clearly. But there's 35 other departments that have to be served by IT in various different ways. And the help desk serves the rest of the municipality. That's its intention. SAP support has got a very formal way of getting support, and it is not part of this help desk.
So if we eliminate these 2, how many do we have left?
We will not have any in-house help desk answering the phone resources anymore.
Okay, thank you.
That'll be helpful.
Any questions, Pete?
I'm done, thanks.
Any questions from the Assembly members?
I just have a quick follow-up.
Yes,
from
Chris.
earlier today from Mr. Harris. Did we make progress today on resolving the short-term fix for ML&P?
Thank you. Good question. We are making progress. I've asked Treasury and Payroll to stay late tonight.
Okay.
There are 9 individuals affected. We fixed 1, another 8. As an example, as what we talked about here, that the complexity of work rules and contract rules, it's not quite as simple as saying somebody worked 8 hours on Thursday. Were those 8 hours of call out? Were they double time? Right? So there's a complex series of rules. We want to make sure we've got the
we've got the right paycheck, and if we can't make sure we get the right paycheck, we want to make sure we're in the ballpark, plus
Plus it down.
some, yeah, yes, again. So the goal is that for those, all 9 people, and one's been taken care of, for the other 8, that we will have something for them today. That's our goal, and we're gonna stay late to make sure it gets done.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you for asking.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. We appreciate that. Yes, Suzanne.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Maybe this isn't a correct comparison, and it may go back to Mr. Rivera's new normal for SAP. But when PeopleSoft was operative, how were problems with it handled? As far as, I assume there must have been, it wasn't maintained.
So, thank you. So, questions about PeopleSoft. PeopleSoft, we had 15 years of operating experience. So we had long since reached a steady state operating mode where, you know, as folks in the ER like to say, there's no perfect payroll, but the number of errors in the payroll cycle might be 10. And so when we had those, there were established protocols, reports, rules, methods of tracking down the wrong answer and trying to get people information. And while PeopleSoft was in a steady state mode of operation, we weren't also trying to fix a whole host of problems with PeopleSoft because it had already flagged out. So right now we're in a situation where we have a new, fairly complex software system, and we are addressing problems that were not expected with the new software system, while at the same time trying to fix corrections that have arisen. So it's in some ways it's a little bit of a double whammy over what we might have seen in PeopleSoft. But there were methods and protocols within payroll for resolving issues that might come up during the payroll cycle using PeopleSoft. And our goal is to get to something very similar for SAP.
Other questions from Assembly members? If not, that'll end this work session. Next Friday, we'll pick up the rest of it.
Before you adjourn, you want to take one quick look at IT's capital?
Okay. Go ahead.
Thank you.
Sorry, I want to get us out of here.
Okay, I appreciate the lateness of the day. So in IT's department, most of these are not bond-funded projects. There are a variety of projects that are managed with other funds, in part with property tax resources, but CAMA, basically that is, as I mentioned, for those of you who know, worker property appraisal, that 30-year-old system is beyond life support, and it really needs to be upgraded, and Robert and Zoll and Bryant Robbins have taken the initiative to do this, get this ball rolling. As a matter of fact, I think you actually may have something in the assembly workflow to get ahead of the game on this one right here. This is about 1/3 of the cost to update CAMA. This will get the process rolling. And for those of you who may be new, we were that close to getting CAMA updated until we started to invest in time in an ERP. So a little bit of work there on the network and lifecycle costs. A lot of the stuff that they have in there is over 8 years old. Some of our operating systems, our desktop technology is 8+ years old and turnaround. So that's what the 1.2 million is. And then the last one I just want to point out is the SAP licenses. That's part of piece of the cost to SAP licenses starting in 2018. So really excited about having the CAMA project done as well as I think property appraisal. So that's what's going on in the IT's proposed capital budget.
Any more questions from Assembly members? Yes, John.
I know we all want to leave, but we're spending $10 million on this program to assess our property so we can do property tax. I mean, it's like once you have a spreadsheet that does it, you got it.
I don't believe the total number is going to be 10. I think right now we're projecting closer to 7, unless I'm off. That's probably can look up the number, but there are two key issues here. First is that the platform we're running on is a mainframe-based program. I think it's written in COBOL, but I might be wrong.
It's written in COBOL?
I think so.
Good.
And so we're looking to upgrade that in some part because Tyler's not servicing that program anymore. But also, at some point, the mainframe, if it can work for us to get parts on the mainframe, I think our source is, preferred source is eBay. So we find an old mainframe somewhere, I think we've been able to track down parts. So getting off an existing hardware platform that's well past its service life is a desired. Canada is something that we use to do property tax assessment across the entire municipality. So it's sort of central for our ability to accurately and correctly levy property taxes. So I think there are, as Lance mentioned, I think there are two items on the October 24th agenda. One is I believe there's a sole source memorandum that shows up on the addendum to, right now we're using Tyler, and that's the evaluation. I think the sense is that that's the best company to stay with because we're already plugged into them. And the second is to allow us to finance that using the master tax.
The total about $7 million.
Okay.
Other questions from Assembly members? Thanks for being here. This meeting's over with.